Hello everybody, and welcome to the LJL Officially Unofficial Podcast, episode 30. What a glorious round number to end summer split on. Welcome everybody to the podcast. My name is Alex, otherwise known as Lexi. I'm one of your three co-hosts of this podcast. Joining me this week, I have the almost marvelous man himself, Nymaera, otherwise known as Alex Hapgood, switching it up this time. Welcome to the podcast, Nymaera.
Lovely. Well, I'll try next week to get that actually marvelous title, but it's a work in progress.
It's got
a ways to go. You know, as his older brother, I'm just telling you from behind the scenes, a ways to go.
You might have more experience with being almost marvelous, sir.
It's true. Magnificent is always my moniker.
True.
Almost, anyway.
True. And we do have the nobleman himself, Samuel Initia1ise Hapgood. Sir, welcome to the podcast.
Charmed, I'm sure, sir.
Absolutely charmed. Oh yeah. So to be fair,
my nobility shines through. British.
Get on with it, you two.
Yeah.
Sorry, we'll get a room for next episode. It's all right. It's all right. Sorry, Nymaera. Welcome to episode 30, rather. I was about to say 29 for the umpteenth time. Episode 30. Lads, we've actually done 30 episodes. That's kind of phenomenal. Two splits down now, two playoffs, and we've done it.
Yeah, no, I mean, I was relatively surprised at episode 10 and then episode 20. Yeah, no, we keep rolling through them. So good hustle, guys. Good hustle.
We might actually get to episode 100, where we now have expectations that we will have to cosplay.
Yeah.
Like it's not now like a question. If we get to 50, it's like, well, we just have to run it back again.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll have to start thinking about who on earth I'd cosplay.
Well, we've got at least till episode 80 till we actually have to give it some serious thought.
That's true.
I mean, Yone isn't going to be playable at Worlds at this point, and when we record episode 100, Yone will probably be playable at 2 Worlds by that point.
Yeah, I know Al said he wanted to do Ezreal at some point, but do we have to do a Yasuo Yone cosplay because we are brothers? Is that something we have to do?
No, you don't have to do that. You could do Garen and Lux if you wanted. You could do the love couple.
I'm not sure I'm gonna like condone incest.
You know those two are siblings. That is fucking up.
Yeah.
That's really messed up.
Like, as pretty as I am, I'm not sure I'm blonde enough for that.
Me and my girlfriend were watching Django Unchained, and the sister and Leo's character, they're married and they're incest, and that's why I've got that in the recent thing.
Why would you bring that up on a podcast?
Good podcast start, by the way, lads. Good podcast start.
Right, well, there we go. That's what Lexi's been doing in his spare time.
It's a good film if you haven't watched it.
I actually genuinely haven't.
You should watch it.
Isn't it, Django?
Yeah. Tarantino. Yeah, it's the film that everyone thought Leo would actually win an Oscar for because he did the scene where he slaps his hand down and actually bleeds for real and just keeps going.
Oh, yeah.
Very famous.
Like, he's just been doing more and more extreme stuff to eventually earn an Oscar.
Which he did. He finally did it.
Got an Oscar. Yeah, he did.
Whereas The Revenant, right?
Yes, which a film I've not actually watched. Personally.
I have seen it. It's actually very good. Yep.
Did he deserve it?
But I was impressed by that one.
I have to say though, guys, this is not especially about League of Legends.
No, it's not.
We appreciate the conversation of nothing else.
We've gone off. Initia1ise, sir. Yes. What is this podcast then, sir?
It's clearly a movie review. No, this is
this podcast would be a
cosplay movie.
It feels like, yeah, absolutely. This is a podcast basically to add extra content around the Japanese League of Legends scene, specifically in English, because there just isn't a lot going. In fact, bluntly, we feel like we're sometimes the only stuff going. Of course, there are some of the people who do streams and casts, but we're the stuff people doing podcasts and articles and all the rest of it. And this is the home of most of it, so keep listening.
And, well, if we're doing so much work, Papa Riot or someone should be around us, shouldn't they, Nymaera?
And Papa Riot gazes down upon all its creation and sees us, like, making little castles out of, like, mud and stuff. Everything we're doing here is off our own backs. This is the building blocks of something hopefully bigger in the future if we were to get picked up. But for now, we are the men down in the dirt.
We're the men down under, except we're not down under. That's the VCS, so we're the men's but I don't know. Northern Hemisphere. We're doing it. We're on it. You can tell I've got my A-gay brain on. I need to get
the
like
land of the setting sun rather than the rising one.
Feels it, yeah. Feels it a little bit. Yeah, sadly, Papa Riot doesn't like us. All of these views and opinions are of our own. They also do not represent the LJL Unofficial, so just so you know for the rest of this podcast, if whatever we say doesn't represent it.
On an individual basis, not a brand basis.
That's ideal. That's ideal. By the way, we do have our own social media underneath each of our lovely faces. At MaskedSwan for myself, at Initia1ise with a 1, and at
There is no L.
Nymaera, as well as we have the LJL Officially Unofficial Twitter, Facebook page, and Instagram, as well as Twitch feed, Twitch page, where you can find all of our content, as well as our lovely YouTube channel. Talking about our YouTube channel, you can find all of the past VODs from any and all games that we have covered over on the LJL Officially Unofficial over on our Twitch stream. We upload everything over onto our YouTube, as well as this lovely podcast. If you are listening to it on other means, talking about listening on other means, ladies and gentlemen, you can find this podcast on all major audio streaming platforms, as well as over on our YouTube page. And if you're ever concerned that anything might not be around, you can find it normally within the show notes. Gentlemen, this is gonna be a rather in-depth podcast with a lot of things we're gonna have to cover, right?
We had a lot of games. We had quite a lot of important games. There are nothing that happened over this weekend was particularly low profile, so we've got to cover all of it and give it its just desserts.
I mean, so going through this podcast, so people are aware, we're going to be covering Destination Focus Me and Sengoku and the series that they had, specifically talking about first the narratives for how these teams actually got here to round 3 to be contending for that final spot versus V3 Esports. We're going to be going through their spring, giving a brief idea, because we are expecting as well, people might be coming to this podcast for the first time and they're going to be very confused by the introduction, but we do actually have some important and interesting information, I do promise. You gotta hope. So we'll be talking about the narratives for both of these teams, and then we're going to be giving our key takeaways from that series, discussing key moments and, well, just an overview of the series as well. And then we're going to cap it off with our player of the series, which we had already kind of decided on cast after game 3, really. It was...
I mean, there was so little argument at that point. I was like, this guy's so good, but we'll get to that.
We're not going to spoil it quite yet. Do have to get to that point. For V3 facing off against DFM, we will be covering V3's narrative, how they did in spring, and then how they rose up into the final spot, the number 1 seed in summer, and then everything else that came with that. And then some key takeaways from the 5-game phenomenal series that we had the pleasure of covering, really, gentlemen. And recapping it off with our player of the series. And then if time permits, we might have 1 or 2 other things, but we are all aware that this might be a longer episode that we could go on for a very long period of time. So, gentlemen, let's just get straight into it. Sengoku Gaming. Who wants to begin the covering of Sengoku Gaming, gentlemen? Go on then.
Where to begin with Sengoku? Like, this is a team that was supposed to have been built around winning the LJL, getting to Worlds. They have a roster full of veterans, full of talent, full of, XSKT world champions, even with like the best allegedly AD carry that Japan has to offer in Yutori Mashi. Like, this was a super team that was supposed to be dominating the league, or at least contesting the top end of it. They took down DFM in spring, got to the finals, then lost in the rematch. In summer, they managed to hit second place one more time after a strong start and a bit of a fall off, and then lose 3-1 to V3. And then, well, there was a series versus DFM, which was pretty sad to watch in some ways. It was a bit of a whimper instead of a bang that they ended out their season.
And I mean, we asked a question, about how Sengoku finishing second in spring, did that mean that it was an unsuccessful split for them, given what we assume to be quite a lot invested into this team? So that is the context for the series between them and DFM, because we were saying, hey, well, maybe it's not an unsuccessful split because MSI wasn't there, if you can win the split. Okay, so you already lost to V3. Ain't so good already. then you really need to kick it out the park versus DFM and go back to face V3.
So before we go too much further, gentlemen, let's just talk a little bit about Sengoku and how they did in spring as well, because let's cover a little bit of that. So when they came into spring, we've already asked the question, but they had a really good showing. They secured the second place spot and were definitely, in most of our minds, the second best team in the region at that point.
That's probably fair. I mean, it was spring was odd in that we felt for a long time we had top half of the table with people winning and bottom half of the table, and then it got messy towards the sort of later end of the split where things started to get a bit crazy. Axes were making a run, and and like things like Sengoku, for example. I believe they might have dropped a game to Axes in that run at some point, but they
dropped a game to Rascal Jester.
Rascal Jester is what they did in the spring. And like. There has been this history with Sengoku, right, of they have very strong laners, very strong fundamentals. It's been shown through split, but they have occasionally been caught out being a little bit careless or a little bit greedy, I think is sometimes the way to do it. They try to play for lane, and then Blank will also try to invade, and then Appleman will also be shoved up, and it's like, sometimes you just push a little bit too far, and your hand gets caught in the cookie jar, and it's been a bit of a bane for this squad, particularly if they do get caught off guard.
Yeah, but as one of you already mentioned, this was a team that still in spring was able to beat DFM in that gauntlet match. They were looking strong and at points were definitively the best team in the LJL. There was very high hopes coming into them. Finals, however, we've spoken to death about, so we won't go too much, and we're actually going to cover more of that in DFM's section of narrative kind of talking and just kind of how we got here. But they still looked strong, and we had high hopes for Sengoku coming into summer. Summer started, and then, well, it was good, but they got lucky towards the end to get second place. Let's be real here.
Well, there's luck involved in it across the board, right? Because obviously. I would say that they were unlucky to lose to Crest Gaming Act the first time they faced them. Remember, that was the 45-odd minute team fighting, absolute craziness.
Orm plus Aphelios.
With the large team fighting coming out of CGA, where Gango just popped off on Aphelios at his peak. So you can say, okay, right, maybe there's a bit of luck involved there. You hit Super Week when it really should have been a slam dunk for them. They lost some avoidable matches. They maybe got, Sam said it was greed. I think it's carelessness from Sengoku. I think that's how I'd say Sengoku tend to fall down. And then you go into the last week, and luckily they kind of spared their blushes by CG going 0-2 while they go 2-0. So they were very fortunate to get second, you're right. There's a couple more acts to it to get to that point, though. But either way, a lot of things were out of their control, which aided them in the end.
Yeah, losing to Axis was that really big one in Super Week.
0 and 8 Axis.
Yeah, yes. This was an Axis that were out of it. They had massive roster shuffles, the whole shebang.
This was a game that me and Sam had also covered live for Super Week because of how our Super Week coverage had to be. And I just remember us covering this and then just almost being stunned afterwards. We were just like, we've got 7 more games we have to talk about.
4 in the morning, and there we were.
It was just like, okay, this is where we are. Okay. I think we had Every Day with us as well. And he was like, yeah, because I casted with Every Day. And he's just like, is this how things normally go? And we're like, no. The script's already been flipped. None of us know what's going on. Oh dear, oh my. I think you had yelled so harder during that match, you had actually woken up Alex.
Yeah, I was asleep because I had like another cast that day.
I'd apologize, but I won't say.
Really well,
you did then, so it's okay. Past you did, so it's all right now. But gentlemen, let's talk about the playoffs for Sengoku. We've set the stage fully. We've already discussed how they went, well, their series against V3, but let's really actually kind of break it down because this is what the closest bit of comparison we have for Sengoku coming in to their series versus Detonation Focus Me. And from a Sengoku side, well, they looked very out of sorts, frankly. I doubt they've done much prep work. It doesn't seem they had done much. It was a convincing loss from Sengoku.
They didn't turn up. In fact, it was so bad. Well, I think it started literally from the very first pick locked in. Sengoku had side selection, they had blue side, and the first pick Skarner. And that is
That's for DFM, not 4 versus V3. We're talking about.
Oh, sorry, V3. Oh, sorry, my bad.
But you're absolutely right. That was also really shocking.
Sorry, man.
But yeah, I think versus V3, the first game was V3 pull out a Scion.
Mm-hmm.
They get Archer onto Aphelios, which has been definitely a lot lower down the priority list. This is on blue side as well. And they pull off a lane swap. And they basically end up pushing Sengoku completely, catching Sengoku completely off guard, get a very good lane swap, get loads of gold onto this Aphelios. Apperman on the Renekton gets absolutely nothing, ends that game 0-6-2, whereas Paz on the Scion gets to team up with Lilia, where you throw down the Lilting Lullaby, which sets up Scion to just run into them all and slap them with a massive Decimate and Ultimate. And so, you could see V3 had come in with some game plans that really caught Sengoku off guard. And it wasn't just that, they kind of got these unusual game plans. It was also just sometimes a bit of a player difference where the meta has changed to be significantly more bot-focused. Things like Caitlyn are in meta. We're seeing Jhin, Ashe, where you wanted to get these guys ahead, get these this utility AD carries, or these hyper carry AD carries like Caitlyn, out of lane with turret gold, use them to secure Drakes early on. And honestly, Yutora Mayashi and Enti have not been played around at all this split. And where in spring, honestly, they were one of our better duos. They've not been played around that much in summer, and we began to see why in playoffs. And I think this was the first scene of it, was Enti in particular had a really rough series. He got outclassed pretty hard.
One of the things which kind of was the undoing of Sengoku in spring was when DFM right in the finals just went bot lane. And they kept going bot lane.
Something you highlighted actually going into that series, Alex.
Yeah, no, and that's something we said that maybe about a couple of other teams, but yeah, Sengoku just look like they're really good when they're stable and nothing's really happening. So you make stuff happen, and it happened in spring, happened again this series, and yeah, no, particularly NT had a really really bad showing, but Yutori didn't. He's not his spring self. He's playing at a level much lower than that, and it kind of showed the series.
I mean, I also had questions around Blank as well against V3.
He didn't link up with his team well.
He just seemed a bit out of sorts, and honestly, going into the DFM series, a lot of what we're going to be saying about Sengoku now for their V3 series just gets emphasized to the highest point versus DFM, which we will come into in a moment. But honestly, let's talk about a different team. Let's talk about the opposite side team, because we're probably going to talk about more about Sengoku when we talk about the series. Detonation focused me, gentlemen. How was their spring?
Fantastic.
Phenomenal, right? They went 12-2, only losing to Sengoku and an asterisk V3, because we do have to put the asterisk there, because that...
It was a weird one, that.
We all have different opinions about why it went wrong, but there's enough of us having different opinions where it now becomes an asterisk and just goes, it was just a shit show.
Yeah, kind of.
But even with those upsets, still 12-2, still on normal standard record for DFM. The upset really came in that gauntlet match, gentlemen.
Yes, it did. DFM came in feeling pretty confident. Then they went 2-1 up versus Sengoku Gaming in their sort of juggernaut match. Then pulled off this weird Gnar fixation without the...
That's right!
Without kind of the additional engage to back it up. And then they couldn't, and then they managed to get Gnar ahead in one game. Then went for the objectives the second game and didn't get Gnar ahead, and neither worked out, and they lost 2 back-to-back off some weird drafting, and Sengoku going, we've got a better draft, we're playing well enough, you don't get Ebi ahead, what happens, question mark.
And this was also Sengoku coming in with a perfect read on how strong Varus and Victor were.
Yes.
And they had huge priority on Varus, which turned out to be the 100% pick ban champion, 100% ban champion at points. And they played it in the series, and DFM just couldn't deal with it because, surprise, surprise, the pick was really strong, and they just chose not to ban it.
Yeah, and this was before any other team was actually picking Varus.
We had some mid lane Varus, is what we had, remember? That was what we were getting some weirdness of. Arya was pulling it out mid and that kind of thing, and then so was Ninja. So we were seeing little bits of it, but it wasn't at that kind of ridiculous priority. It became a patch or so later.
which, let's be real, now this is where we have to put the asterisk again, but this time now for DFM, not for V3, when they were playing against DFM. Okay, so we talked about this to death. This is something we have mentioned countless times. Spring playoffs have a huge asterisk on them because round 3 and the finals are played on a different patch to what the patch we initially started with. Blah, blah, blah. We're going to laugh about it and meme about it now because it's all in the past and it doesn't matter anymore. But DFM actually loved this patch. Let's be real, gentlemen.
Yeah.
That Trundle turned into the biggest bait and switch that I've ever really seen. It's like, we're going to play Trundle, dominate V3 with Trundle, go back for the rematch for Sengoku, and then have the counter pick for that Trundle for Blank's Trundle. It was a chef's kiss.
Yeah. No, yeah, DFM came off of the break and then just had a really good read on the meta, you know? Just, yeah.
Yep. Trundle, and then also having the counter pick set up for steal of the Kindred, which I almost wonder, if Boogie had played the Trundle, would we have seen the Kindred out? Maybe? That probably was planned.
It was partly picked up by SKT way back in the day because he did play Kindred in Italy, which...
Because that was back when Bengi couldn't really play those picks, yeah.
Well, there we go. We got the T1 historians in with us, so we're never going to miss anything about Blank or Pyrian moving forward. However, summer, gentlemen, as that's what we're more interested in. Who wants to take this? I don't want to touch summer DFM before playoffs.
Sam, do you want to do it as a fan, or do you want it to be me as disappointed dad Nymaera?
Go disappointed dad Nymaera because
right.
it's because that's where I'm at too, frankly.
Okay.
Very
well,
cool
I mean,
fan.
I'll give you playoffs DFM then. Right, I'll give you that. I'll do this. Okay, so we've used this narrative throughout most of our broadcasts. DFM were something like back to back champions. Then at 4 on the trot, and they were 8. Was it 4 going for 5?
They were 4 going for 5.
No, they were 5 going for 6. I thought. I said
No,
to you.
because they did not win 2018 spring.
So they done 2018 summer, then 2019 everything, then 2020 spring. So that's 4 on the trot.
4 going for 5. Okay.
Anyway, yeah. So huge historical backlog to them. In spring, they had arguably the best player in each role. They had never had less than an 80% regular season win record, and in the previous splits, even when they ended up losing, it was still like losing to the eventual champions, Rampage or something like that in one series, and that's the one thing they'd lose. So this split, they come in, and immediately there are some stumbling blocks. They end up losing to Sengoku very early on, and they had a composition which was very strange. They tried to counterpick a Zoe with the Xerath, and then that just didn't work out with the team comp. And immediately from the start, we're like, all right, okay, what's happening here? And we said after the spring finals, like, hey, okay, so now the thing is for DFM, we know you can win. Don't be complacent. That's the one thing. Don't be complacent. Just win. Just chuck it out the park.
Yeah.
That didn't happen this regular split. They ended up 7-7. They lost to every top team. They didn't actually win against a top team, as in like the top half of the table, until the very last week, where they managed to snag 1 win against CGA, which are probably the most high variance team that we had in the league, right? So they were probably the easiest one to do so if you caught them on the downswing, which they kind of did in that game. We had so many different questions about individual players. Ebby not really doing very well. Ebby and Steel both going in at weird times. Gang being out of sorts for the first time we've seen from him.
Really,
and Seros and Seros also kind of being a little bit. He had like weird Ziggs games where he was accidentally satcheling into the enemy team.
Oh yeah, I mean we saw Pink play his one trick and actually get a double kill.
Yeah. Like, granted, Katarina can go in on that, but
it's just
still gets
no,
it,
sure,
right?
sure. But it's still
Exactly.
like, hey, DFM miscalculating, misplaying, outdrafting themselves, and very, very well at points almost stumbling into playoffs. Right at the very end, they ended up getting a tiebreaker to get themselves 4th slot at the end of it. But yeah, no, they hadn't won a single game versus the top tier against like Sengoku or V3 at the end of it. They gone 0-2 versus both. We had a lot of questions about them. Regular split DFM was in shambles. And in all seriousness, we said this several times. I even said they're not even a top 4 team in my eyes at that point. At the end of that, while they were 4th, personally, I had Burning Core above them, which was just
kind of sacrilege beforehand, but because of the players on Burning Core, you have to give 3 members. You're just like they're so much better than the rest of the parts that are with them, but the rest of the parts with them actually are okay, and it's weird,
serviceable.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think that's the best way of doing it. And well, let's talk about playoffs, Initia1ise and Nymaera. And Initia1ise, let's go through playoffs. And Burning Core, I kind of set you up on purpose for this.
Yeah, and I think that's probably rightly so, because we had these questions. Okay, DFM have looked better in the last week or so, stepped up in the way we wanted them to, but like, it's a small sample size. Is it enough? Are they up to the level where they contest with other playoff teams? Like, thank you for turning up and showing up, but is it enough? But there was always this little glimmer in the back of your mind, because this is DFM. It's the guys looking to go on for a 5th championship, and much like with TSM over, much like with Fnatic and G2 in the LEC, when it mattered, these guys turned up. And that was always the fear with these guys. The question was, were we getting the weight of history coming, or was it the recent form we were getting? And it was so difficult as an analyst to call out, because it's like, on one hand, I can't be surprised they just fall out in the first round. On the other, can you really count these guys out? And you couldn't. They came into the series versus Burning Core, and it was a bit scrappy. Let's not make any bones about it. It went to 5 games. Proud and Gang were battling back and forth.
Really were.
Better support. And, you know, like, the Proud was playing out of his damn mind, basically trying to turn around games he had no right to be in. DFM were getting crazy early leads and then throwing it down the park in about, like, 15 minutes.
What also helped is Burning Core's members who we had questions about actually turned up and were playing pretty well.
Yeah, no, Yuhi had probably his highest level performances we've ever seen from him.
Yeah,
so that was really
this is the time.
Frustrating thing was, though, that once his aggressive invade style got really done in by Steel in that series, like every game he was being out jungled. Like, he managed to go down. He tried to invade on a Karthus and ended up down 20 CS, was down 2 levels, that kind of thing. Top lane as well, Rayfarki wasn't bad for most of it, but was very quiet, which was not what we were expecting either. He had the one Mordekaiser game where he managed to come back into it after a rough early lane, but apart from that, it was like nothing to sort of write home about. And that was what was a bit frustrating. It's like, Proud was god tier, Yuhi steps up, Yu-Gi-Oh's looking great as well. The 2 other star players haven't really been there.
It's kind of
that.
Okay, don't get me wrong. I don't think that Rayfarki had an awful series. Or once had an awful series. It's just like it just wasn't the level we expected from them, and those are the guys that we kind of expected the most to step up. Whereas actually it was the rest of Burning Core, which gave us a bit of a shock.
But then I've personally been thinking about that on my own, and think about it. The 2 players on DFM that we had the most questions about and stepped up the most was also Ebby and Steel. So how much of it is Burning Core's maybe best 2 players still just playing up to the same level, and then DFM actually going, well, we are technically better players, and now the sums of the rest of your part have to try and make up the difference between us, and that's just not going to be a thing. So they played better, but is it enough to make up the difference between Ebby and Rayfarki, which is a known difference, or Once and Steel? Again, now is a known difference between these 2 levels of play.
So I don't want to dwell on it too long, but I think that's a pretty good question to ask. But I think for me, part of it is, at least from my read of Burning Core, it's Rayfarki who comes to support Once on his bizarre, crazy invades. Like, I'm just going to hop over this wall as Kindred from the back of the Baron pit and just attempt to steal red and then flash out. Like, yeah, that's fine. Yeah. Like, that's the kind of thing that Once does, where he has got him crazy leads, 100 CS leads in the jungle, like 5 level leads and multiple matches. Like, that works. But DFM were very coordinated against that, and that meant that with Once falling behind, you then had Steel and Ebby set up to be very dangerous, and as a result, Rayfarki can't go in for the crazy mechanical plays because there's just not the lane state to do it, and his jungler has been kind of caught out trying to find the big advantage.
But even when it all said and done, they pushed DFM to those 5 games, and it gave us some questions to think about Detonation Focus Me moving forward. If Burning Core can push Detonation Focus Me to 5 games, what happens moving forward? Is Burning Core just way better than we all expected? Or is this DFM having problems and they're slowly fixing them? This was a question we came into for our CGA game. Crest Gaming Act facing off against Detonation Focus Me, and Crest Gaming Act, after their win versus the Hawks, had side selection, something that Detonation Focus Me didn't have to worry about against Burning Core. Might have come into it against Burning Core, but it didn't play a part. Crest Gaming Act. Who wants to take Crest Gaming Act? Go on, Nymaera.
Right.
Go on. If you must. Oh, I insist, sir. I insist. You get to talk about Aria.
Before we start with CGA. CGA are just all over the shop, man. They have a whole host of very talented individual players like Aria and Nap on his day, and actually I have to say Grendel stepped up a lot compared to Spring.
Yeah.
And Gango, of course, has had his carry potential. We saw that versus the Hawks. Really, really fun games. Of course, they had that one game loss where they overplayed themselves and they gave an early triple kill over to an Ezreal who carries really hard with early gold because he gets the early Muramana spikes, and that is really bad for you.
It is.
CJ got just taken apart this series. And I guess it was unexpected because of their split where they ended up being in contention for second place right up until the end of the split. In fact, it was almost a lock. They had to just get one win and secure themselves a tiebreaker. They didn't get that. They went 0-2 and Sengoku went 2-0. And it was really not so good for them. They played a style this entire split about taking fights when they presented themselves, not necessarily playing around objective timers like most of the LJL does.
Yep.
And that caught people off guard, like DFM in their first match versus them, when they ended up catching them and then snowballing into a Baron and all this other stuff. And so they managed to pull this off versus really good teams. They beat V3, they beat Sengoku, they beat DFM. They took a win off of every team in the league. And they I think on a snowballed game, CGA were probably the most dominant team in the LGL this year. I think in some games. You could make that argument. You can make that argument. They're definitely not the cleanest of teams. But then,
but they never have been.
But then as it kind of went on to like the last couple of games, the regular split, things got we had a lot more questions about them. Unica, their new jungler coming in to replace Yoshi from Spring, was okay. He was stable, solid. Maybe ended up being like a mid-tier jungler by the end of things, but never. He's not a top-tier jungler in the LGL. Go against the Hawks, and I mean, it's still just Gango and Aria just kind of carrying things, I guess, although Aria had a couple of troubles versus Dasher. So do you want to dive into the series now versus DFM? Or?
Unless anyone wants to say anything about the CGA series to hint towards things we're going to talk about in the Sengoku series.
So, once again, this is Gang and Utapon being really good. This is the start of Seros and Nico, which is also pretty damn good.
Actually, that's a really important part, because he only played it once versus Burning Core in that first game, which they got a victory on, but then because it didn't work as well as they were expecting, they're like, well, guys, we'll do other stuff. But yeah, go ahead. Keep going out.
This is also largely Steel demolishing Unica. The one game that Unica managed to sneak out was off a very, very aggressive path on Trundle in game 2. But apart from that, Steel just had his number the entire series. So it's like a lot of things we were going, oh no, DFM 3-1 CGA looking pretty good in most lanes here. Steel's back, everybody's back. Oh dear, Caitlyn. And with these alarm bells, the rest of the league beginning to ring. It's like these guys may be starting to come back here.
Yeah, and something that I really like to just highlight before we do talk about Sengoku DFM is Cirrus's Nico. While that was a really important thing, the fact that shut down Ardia from playing his typical playstyle, which, in all honesty, Arya is definitely the best mid laner of the LJL. Still in my heart, I believe that. Alex keeps saying it. We all believe it. In all seriousness, he is just that good.
Yeah, it's not just a meme. The guy's actually pretty good. But
then you compare him to Pyrion. Pyrion might be second, third best. It doesn't even matter after Arya, really, because it's contextual. Now Ace might technically be the second best mid laner. It's all contextual and about what's happening and the players and the team and everything else. The Nico, it was effective against CGA, but it didn't do what it did against Sengoku, which is the really messed up part. And it also just shows how good Arya is. And that's an important comparison I think is worth noting, which we could overlook.
Okay.
But let's go into it, gentlemen. I'm going to start us off. This is a repeat of last spring's finals and gauntlet match. There is so much history. I think coming into this game, one of you actually knew how many games the two had played. It was
I think they were 7 and 6. I think they were 7 and 6 to Sengoku, I believe, before this series.
Yeah, Sengoku had a winning record against DFM, which is shocking. I mean, it was just for the year, but
yeah, but that's what we care about, and that's including last playoffs and
for these rosters,
all of them. Let's just rip the band-aid off. DFM clapped Sengoku 3-0. And by the way, if anyone's interested in analysis, there's not going to be much, because when I say they clapped them, they clapped them.
Oh, no, I know I got confused earlier with like which series we were diving into, but yeah, literally first pick of the series was Sengoku accidentally locking in Skarner, and they put it top lane.
And you just saw
honestly, I do, and they tried to back out, remake the lobby. It was determined to be player error, as far as I'm aware, so it wasn't remade. And Sengoku lost that game handily. They were competitive for a little bit, but I think honestly that in itself tilted them for most of that series. And
well, you just saw Blank's face after it got locked in of just pure confusion.
He was horrified.
Yeah, bless him.
And so were we, really, because honestly, we expected Sengoku to push DFM because we still had some questions about it, because Burning Core were like, okay, yeah, it was a fun series and they did some stuff, and their coach is 34. That's his username, not his age. But like he was the coach of Pentagram and Rampage, the team which was the champion of LJ. Between like 2018 and 2016 to 2018, they were very strong teams in the LJL, and they took a lot of titles off of DFM. So this guy had a lot of, but then it wasn't like Burning Core were like a superstar team, and then we thought CJ, oh, maybe they'll play well against DF. No, they didn't really. They kind of rolled over a bit, and then Sengoku rolled over even harder. So we didn't even know what was going.
And the really fucked up thing is that Burning Core pushed DFM harder than Crest Gaming Act and Sengoku. And me's going in some like weeks back going, I think Burning Core are the third best team. Now doesn't sound fucking crazy. I need to find that soundbite now.
I will tell you partly why I think that is. It's because honestly, support difference in this series was immense, and Proud versus DFM on some of those engage picks and things like the Bard really did some work versus DFM, and that kind of has proven to be a little bit of their Achilles heel. Sometimes a good support against them can do some danger.
That's
and this
true.
game, first game wasn't fantastic from 0-4-2. He then goes 1-8-1 on Nautilus and 0-10-1 on Pantheon, where Utapon and Gang eviscerated the bot lane this series.
Bad.
Absolutely eviscerated. And Steel as well outdid Blank pretty much every game. And even the game he was put behind, he manages to come back and ends up 10-1 and bloody 9. Like...
No, Steel was absurd in that series, but...
Sengoku went 1-6 in playoffs, gentlemen. They had the lowest win rate outside. No, they had the lowest win rate out of all playoff teams.
And then you can talk about strength of opposition and stuff, but that's still a black mark on Sengoku's record now, really.
Yeah, because they had a solid showing in spring and summer season. Spring playoffs were disappointing, but at least a good start, assuming that trajectory continues. Summer, question marks, but they're on the trajectory. They're in second, and then this series.
We might dive into this in off season or whatever, but now, I mean, we don't have time to talk about it now, but honestly, the question is, losing in that fashion, does Sengoku stay together as a roster?
I doubt it. Not with the money involved.
Doubt.
There's a good chance they don't. We won't. Just food for thought. Obviously, we have no information, and we'll keep an eye on off-season stuff. But that's just the question it raises now. So yeah.
I mean, this was also another one of those series where once again it became fairly evident fairly early the bot lane was going to be a huge focus. Even if you gank top a couple times because you got Nidalee plus CC or whatever. Once you've done that, you've got a Shen top lane for Ebby or a Volibear that can teleport in. The idea is you get that guy ahead and then you just turn your eyes to bot and just try and crush from there or try crush around those objective fights. And it showed up, honestly. Even in the last game where Ebby on the Volibear got turned around on once or twice, Utapon, Gang, and Steel turned up and just CC'd NT's Pantheon to death multiple. They got 2v2 kills.
Yeah, they did.
Things were going well on the other side.
They're just winning lanes straight up.
Yeah, and like bot side winning. really made Sengoku sweat, and I think that's proven true kind of around the world a lot. It's not always been true, don't get me wrong. Like G2 managed to pull it off against Fnatic despite Rex and like getting leads. They still had things like some of Wonder's champion pool, perhaps just being a god. But the point is that actually at the minute, Apamen's top lane pool, not necessarily in meta as much as you'd like, especially when you want to play, if you wanted to play through topside, which Sengoku have a lot of the year, and it really hurt them.
I mean, there's going to be a lot of questions that we're going to have to talk about this teams and teams in general for post-Worlds coverage. God, it's going to be so long until we do this. We're going to have to retain a lot of this info. I might start doing voice memos for myself so I can listen back and go, what's my thoughts on this team? Ah, very good. That's me. As we've already talked about, personally, a big part for me, not just the bot lane, was Blank. How critical Blank is to Sengoku's success. Because it oh my god, we all thought about this, and I know Nymaera had mentioned to both of us heavily that he's like, I think if Blank doesn't do anything, they lose. And I had my own opinion on stuff. I was like, well, I think Pyrion and Apamen control a bit more. No, Alex was right this whole time. I think as Sam was right as well to a degree. No, Sengoku can't do shit without Blank winning the lane and winning games, really.
Kind of reminds me of, it's like you compare like an old army rugged Jeep compared to something which is really sleek and just off the production line, a modern Mercedes, something like that. Wonderful piece of engineering, does some great stuff, has a
TV inside.
Yeah, it's higher end is so good and everything works so efficiently until like one little piece goes wrong. And then just everything in this finely tuned balance just falls apart. And Blank was very key to that. Everything was built off of this platform, this foundation of Blank getting early pressure and being able to make the first move on the map. Playoffs, Blank was not that. He was the flat tire.
And like part of it as well is we had issues in the V3 series that like Blank was going for plays and the team wasn't willing to back him up. Like,
it's a bit of both.
People weren't willing to sax it. And actually, it was a bit of both, right? Like, actually, if your laners are wanting to play for lane, you can't go for those invades. But on the other hand, the way junglers are at the minute when you are playing things like Lily, Graves, particularly in the LJL, when certain teams we've been hearing have been scrimming VCS teams and the like, you want to get these guys ahead of the other enemy jungler or things get bad really quickly because that matchup tilts very hard.
Well, I know, in all fairness, comparing the V3 series to the DFM series, Boogie wasn't doing the crazy stuff that Steel was trying to do. Boogie was just going, I'm just going to play very stock. We're only trying one special thing, which we can talk about when we talk about V3. But V3 were doing things against Sengoku that was just like very bog standard except for one thing. And Boogie was like, I'm not even going to play more than one champion until you ban it. And then...
we said this like immediately after the series. It's like Blank and Boogie were kind of just aiming to do the same thing, but V3 managed to facilitate that far better than Sengoku did. Blank dug his own grave, really. He did end up going for a lot of plays which he just was not set up to do. You don't end up invading through topside or fighting for top scuttle when Apamen is already doing pretty well on his Gnar, a champion that needs to have that lane pressure. And then he'd have to give up like a double wave to turret, and it's like there's a lot of problems with that. So I think that V3 just had a much better handle on how to balance their team's respective roles and what they wanted to achieve within the early game in particularly, and Sengoku missed the mark on that by a long margin.
And DFM got to emulate it as best they could and then go to the next level and really emphasize everything. They won through every single player in each different game. Different player basically was the carry. Ebby carried one of the games, the bot lane carried another one, and Syros, arguably Steel and Syros carried another one, but like everyone at some point hard carried, even though when everybody's winning their lane anyway, it's not really like they're carrying.
The team snowballs like who's carrying? Well, everybody,
but these guys have the really impressive KDA, so let's say it's them this one. And how phenomenal was it for DFM to actually be doing that against Sengoku? And it's a bit disappointing for Sengoku, but on the flip side, DFM, they look unstoppable.
Well, they didn't pull it off during the regular split, so it's really, really important. Broke the precedent of the summer split.
Like, the question here with this matchup was like, okay, one of these teams going on to face V3. We want that to be a competitive finals, and we want to see who's going to come through and be our thing.
Why do you think I asked this question last week, gentlemen? Even if there's a 3-0, what do they have to do?
Look good doing it, and honestly, DFM did this was their most convincing series by a long way, and
oh yeah.
Pretty much every player could hold their head high after this one. Seros was forcing Heimerdinger bans again. Pyrion was
So
not
stupid.
happy with that. Not happy with that champion being around about. Like that kind of, like Steele's Nidalee was superb. Ebby was looking very good on the Shen in particular. We've waxed lyrical about the bot lane.
We have.
And Sengoku Gaming on the other hand looked like a little bit lost in the early game, I think, as Nymaera was saying. DFM certainly didn't.
So with that, gentlemen, DFM clapped Sengoku. There's no other way of saying it. And we've all agreed with that. But to end on a high note, gentlemen, let's highlight a player from the DFM Sengoku series that was our player of the series. And Samuel, as our DFM fan and resident man that tries to remain not biased on casts.
Only on the podcast.
Only on the podcast, obviously. Professional on the cast. May you introduce your player of the series?
Absolutely. It was the man, myth, and legend from the bot lane. It was great to have you back, gang.
Use upon. Gang.
Superstar.
Nymaera, you were talking about this player on cast. Is he still your player of the series?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, we basically just said as soon as the game ended, yeah, this guy's really good.
Well, and of course, I'm all joining you. I'm the resident support player, and yeah, he is just so good, gentlemen. And I'll let you both gush far more as you were casting it, so go for it.
Nymaera had this comment, right, where Gang got Leona 3 games of series, and basically the moment we ended it, I think if Gang is on Leona, he is the best support in the league, hands down. Because the things he was doing on this champion, the problem solving, the engages, the disengages, were just unreal. The limits he can push on the champion.
I think what I said was if Gang is on Leona, he's the best player in the LJL. The guy is absurdly good at this champion.
I don't know.
Absurdly good.
I don't know. Boogie's in the LJL, mate, and Lina.
True.
I don't know. Yeah. I don't know. But no, in all fairness, that's a really fair comparison. And Gang shouldn't... Something that bothered me is Sengoku's refusal to play anything different and not to ban the things they're just obviously losing to.
Wait, but didn't DFM do that in Spring Juggernaut match?
But then they adapted. They overcome... improvise, overcome, and I don't know. I can't remember how that Bear Grylls saying goes, but DFM did it in round 3 and the finals. Gang, though, honestly, because I meant to be gushing about Leona Gang, phenomenal. Like, he was basically solo winning team fights as Leona, really. Going to like 100 health and then walking out a lot of the time. Like, kiting damage that no one else was getting.
Yeah.
I mean, it also just shows in how well they punished the opposing bot lane. They were getting 2v2 kills in a lot of the games. That last match in particular, when the top side was quite contested. Honestly, and people were making plays across the map. The fact that you spawn a Gang, like, put NT like so far in the dirt, he was literally just walking gold. Like he was that far behind. Was huge, and Gang's roams were great. His solar flare engages were great. And there's always been this question with Leona as well about if you go in, you don't get to come out. Gang seem to say that's not true with me because I just find ways to Zenith Blade to random things to get myself out of trouble and then walk away. Like
he's doing like thresholds to things where it's like, how did you do that?
Yeah, he's using Zenith Blade as a minion taxi. If he gets ganked, he like Zenith Blades the person behind him and flashes that after. It's
very big brain. Nymaera said maybe the best player in the LJL on Leona. He was 1v1ing NT and basically telling him to get out his lane and was phenomenal from game 1 to game 3. Congratulations to him.
Part of the reason why NT looked so crap and why it was basically because DFM were really good at picking him off because like he's trying to progress position aggressively, but Gang would just catch him out so well. So yeah, no, absolutely, this guy's a monster.
Yep, well deserved to him. And gentlemen, that rounds out our coverage of Sengoku facing off against DFM and the narrative stuff for it. And we're actually pretty good on time at the moment, may I also just add.
Nice.
V3 versus Detonation Focus Knee. Now, this was our finals, and I must remind you, gentlemen, before we talk about this, before we talk about this epic series, withhold yourself from gushing over this incredible 5-game series. Because first, we must set the stage for V3 and how this team truly came to evolve over the 2020 season in front of our very eyes. And spring, Initia1ise, was a promising start. A lot of changes, though, for V3, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. They had bring in a new jungler. They brought in this PCS guy, Boogie, who was an ex-Flash Wolf superstar, but they just lost kind of their own jungler, Baby Now River, as well. It was looking, well, that's not great. Are we going to be okay with that? You know, they had Yutora Meashi. They've had to bring in this rookie into the bot
big
lane.
question about him.
Is he going to be good enough? Who is this Reiner guy? We've lost Vivid, who's another one of those superstars who's like, you know, obviously we haven't seen him in this split because of visa issues, which is a massive shame. But, you know, you've lost a superstar bot lane. You've lost a top jungler. Yeah, you're bringing in Boogie, who looks like he could be really good, but I don't know about this bot lane or what they're going to be. Reiner and Boogie have been probably the best two players in the LJL flat out this split. There's an argument about who gets that title, but they were both damn good. And Archer is hot on the heels as an insanely talented rookie as well, who has been able to do some very, very dangerous things when he's been able to snowball ahead. And we were wondering about all these rookies and imports, and they've all worked out really well.
But even like in spring, because obviously you talk about that in summer too. Remember that like Reiner was probably our second best support in spring behind Gang, who was looking phenomenal back then.
Obviously,
he was our best jungler. And Archer also had some really good shining moments too, particularly on his Aphelios, right?
Boogie won our overall MVP, I think, didn't he?
Yeah. I think in terms of the numerical ones, when we totaled up like all our players of the games and all that kind of stuff. I think he did. So V3 coming into spring.
God, we've covered this for a long time, lads. God, it's just started to realize how long we've covered this region for. It's starting to hit me.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Continue.
So we had a look at 2019 summer playoffs. We did end up recording them. We did a lot of our practice casts, the very first ones on those series. So we saw V3 reach the finals after beating CGA, their old roster in the semifinals, and then going on and losing, unfortunately, to DFM in the finals. But then kind of coming, so they had like lofty aspirations coming into spring. You know, they got absolutely hammered in game 1 versus TFM. That was when Boogie played Diana jungle. They had the Nocturne mid. Oh no, it wasn't Nocturne mid that game, but like they got a bit dumpstered on by DFM in game 1. So then we think, okay, all right, how are these guys gonna go? And they kind of continually started trundling along at 1-on-1 every week, and then suddenly they just blew out the back half of the split. And then they crushed round 1 of the playoffs versus Axis, like our Cinderella team. Like,
bless them.
Wow, when will the pumpkin carriage? No, just stamps the pumpkin into the ground.
Smashes it in the dirt.
Yeah.
Boogie was not having it.
Now.
But then, like, they go up against CGA in spring playoffs. They have to reverse sweep them. There's some worries about Archer being a rookie in playoffs. Is he mental booming? They don't look so good in lane. And then they go up. They end up prevailing through that, and Ace has some really good mid lane performances in that part. And then they come back up against DFM, who lost against Sengoku in that lower bracket match, and they just kind of fall apart. And you know, I'm just whizzing through spring, so obviously it's more.
That's the point of this, stuff. Yeah.
But they just kind of mental boom a bit in that game. You know, Archer has a lot of emphasis put onto him, particularly in that. I'm trying to remember if it was game 1 or 2 when he's on the misfortune with the Yumi, and he doesn't quite manage to carry. Ace gets manhandled by Saros in the mid lane. Boogie can't find the impact he needs to on like his scaling junglers, so he has to go back towards these early game junglers, and that doesn't quite work out. And so yeah, V3 just kind of don't hit all the right buttons. The cylinders firing out of sequence, and yeah, so kind of they drop out to a bit of a sad farewell in the spring playoffs, but it's, you know, still a 3rd place finish. These guys still left a really big impact, and they lost the eventual winners of
And
DFM.
ladies and gentlemen, put a note in this, because this might be something, depending on time, we might touch on towards the very end, as this is a pretty important point that Nymaera has really highlighted with the mental boom, that round 3. But in all fairness, round 3, they got 3rd place in the standings in summer, and then they got it in playoffs. And this was around / above all of our expectations for this team, especially when we got to see them round 4, round 5. We were like, well, they might be able to do a deep run. It kind of depends on how things go. And
well, that's because the Hawks exploded.
Hawks exploded, and Rascal Jester just didn't perform up to the expectations. But they also had a really awkward game versus CGA, which was
in the playoffs. Yeah, I mean, regular split, whatever. But like, oh man, that playoff series, that might still be my favorite playoff series this year. That was such a good series. It was
great.
Well, the CGA Rascal Jesters one.
Oh,
Yeah,
it was
yeah,
so
that
much
one.
fun.
Yeah.
But anyway, then like obviously coming out of spring playoffs, V3 had expectations. It kind of exceeded them. Kind of exceeded a couple of them.
Initia1ise, would you like to explain how they exceeded them so far?
They went 9-0 before finally dropping a game in summer. Like, they absolutely ran over
Tied
the league.
DFM's spring record.
Yeah, they had some of the most insane KDAs across the board. Boogie and Rhino were pushing for best KDAs in role internationally. There were like 1 or 2 people ahead because they had like 1 or 2 games and therefore had insane.
Oh no, they
KDAs
only started losing them towards the end.
Yeah, exactly. And you know, they were like people just behind like Showmaker and the like. That's the kind of stats they were at. Boogie was imperious in the jungle.
He was.
Rhino's Thresh and Set in the regular season as well was taking kids to town. They were playing very fast, playing very coordinated, and it was things like the decisiveness and the fundamental macro is what we'll call this. I don't want to say like fundamentals. Sengoku. It's like the way that Sengoku CS, for example, tends to just be better than a lot.
Yeah, and the way like Pyrion resets around mid to save like, a lot of CS
exactly.
and all that stuff. Yeah.
It's that kind of thing. Wave manipulation, all that stuff's really good. For V3, it is the way they are very good at resetting at the right times, and then what they do with those resets, gain control of an area with their vision control, and then playing around that
vision is
was
so
just
good. So
way better than every team in the league. Just way better. And it meant that they had control around those objective fights because Boogie would have run over the jungle likely with the help of his team. They would probably get bot lane ahead, and then from there it's like, well, we've got this crazy vision control, we can snowball into objectives. It was a style that was very, very strong for a very long time. And it was only sort of towards the last couple weeks that people managed to catch him out a little bit. One was some bad drafting with CGA, and the other one was honestly a fairly deserved loss.
Okay, actually, I'd say that both of them are not great drafts. But even then, I think that I mean, I said this kind of in the finals
game quite as well.
too. Well, like actually, so when they lost against CGA, they had like a draft which really couldn't do anything in the early game. They couldn't gank for an Italy, and they still made it competitive because they're really damn good at the game.
Yes.
Sengoku, Boogie was on Kha'Zix, that was against like a full-on team fight comp which never got isolated, and he still managed to get relevant into that game.
Wasn't this also a game where they picked Blitzcrank or something, or is that a different team that did that one? Wasn't this? I thought this was a V3 thing one where they.
Like.
It was just a horrible draft up and down.
Yeah, like the Kha'Zix one was like, okay, we've got a Camille top. We want to try and get the Camille ahead. Use the Kha'Zix to kill off this Aatrox, who's going to be isolated all the time. Get the Camille ahead. We can basically survive get 3 in mid, and then have Kha'Zix wandering to the side lanes to get people ahead with that and like win those 2v1. It didn't happen.
No, it didn't.
Paz had a rough game. Aatrox got solo kills.
Oh no, Rhino was
ahead.
on Tom Kench and he had an awkward game.
Yeah.
You were supposed to have this Tom Kench holding down mid, keeping the people safe, and then
Tom Kench Ash that was wave clear, and then Rhino lost lane really hard, and
then turn up somewhere else, and it went awkwardly, and they lost the game. And then obviously we hit playoffs, and we hit playoffs. And we said, okay, this is the best team in the league. Will patches change things? ? Will Ace's laning, which was still occasionally a little bit suspect, and things like Karma being off the table and a little bit nerfed, and Syndra being a bit nerfed, like, is that going to hurt Ace? Are we going to see what other picks does he have in the tool?
And if I may take this from you for playoffs, gentlemen, as been rather kind with giving you all the notes.
Do take on, sir.
So now I'm just gonna be fucking going for it now.
Go.
Gentlemen, for playoffs for V3. They came in hard and fast, and they didn't give a fuck. Boogie brought out a brand new champion. Lilia was made available on 10.16, and it got so bad. I'm zooming through a little bit, but it got so bad for Sengoku after 2 games losing to it. Or was it 3 games? Regardless, doesn't matter. They have to start banning it because it's that scary, and they have no idea how to beat this. Sengoku, frankly, looked kind of all over the place. I've put in my notes here, and I'm gonna say it. They looked kind of trash, and this was a sight for things to come, as we've already seen with Sengoku. Blankly looked confused, and they fell very far behind. All members from V3 also were solid, and in all fairness, outside of Game 1's lane swap, they were pretty much better than their spring to summer split. It was really hard to say, have V3 improved between summer and playoffs? Yeah, a little bit, but they weren't pushed.
They looked really good in summer regular split. How they improved compared to spring? Yeah, probably.
Yes, and now, gentlemen, we get to talk about the alluded Game 1 that V3 Esports brought out against Sengoku Gaming, and they did a lane swap. And this didn't go well for Sengoku at all, now did it?
This is like a day after SK tried to lane swap versus Schalke, and they got absolutely manhandled. It looked like V3 had really practiced it. In fact, we've been hearing that they were practicing lane swaps versus the VCS top 2 teams, Flash and Gum, and they came out super practiced. They made sure they had like all the correct runes so they could dive more easily. So they had like Aftershock on set instead of Phase Rush or something like that. They had Teleport and Cull on their AD carry when the AD carry was taking heal and went Doran's Blade, and they were just super well practiced.
Oh my
they
God,
ended up just they got so much value out of this lane swap, it was unreal.
I can't wait to talk about Archer's TP, because let's be real, it was far more important in the DFM series, some of the stuff that he was pulling off.
Yeah, he ended up teleporting behind Renekton a couple of times and like getting some good fights. But yeah, no, they just knew how to maximize value. They also played Sion to wave clear on the weak side of the map. Even if he died, he could clear the wave. And Paz's Sion, really good too.
Scary good.
No, V3 looked very practiced, and they made lane swaps, which are kind of an antiquated strat rather. Made it look relevant.
Yeah.
With the right comps, with the right picks, it still worked.
And V3's dynamic drafting and willingness to play similar comps but with different champions in slightly different ways, even if it's unorthodox, they've definitely practiced and made it work. And against Sengoku, well, it showed in leaps and bounds. Now, they only played one playoff game because they were our top seed, tied with Sengoku being second place, meaning they only played one game to get into the finals. That is part of the luxury of being that top team. One series down, they're in the finals. Gentlemen, we've discussed how Sengoku almost made the finals, yet just maybe a bit too early. Something wasn't quite right. We've covered the Cinderella story that it was for DFM having to run it the whole way after their worst performance ever to come back into the finals. And V3, the team of plucky underdogs from spring that almost made the finals, but DFM denied them that in round 3. Well, they were our number 1 seed, gentlemen, facing off against that team that denied them the finals opportunity previously. And who gets to beat them? Well, it was too perfect. Anime music began. Opening songs ran out. And Destination Focus Me had to face off versus V3 in the finals. And frankly, what a fucking series we were treated to at the end, gentlemen.
We've been really blessed by LJL this year with all this series.
They just gave it to us in more ways than one. We're going to go through this one specifically game by game because we have to give this credit. And this is partly why I've been running these guys on a little bit through our topics and not letting them go down the rabbit hole that we normally go, because this is the rabbit hole that we should really go down. Because once we cover this, gentlemen, we're not going to have an opportunity to talk about it till after Worlds. So let's get this right this time round. Game 1. V3 were victorious, but, gentlemen, how did they become victorious is the question I'm going to pose to you both. Explain.
It was bloody close is what it was. And it V3 managed to come out ahead-ish early on, outside, partly because of a couple of things. One, Boogie on the Lilia was power farming absolute storm. Steel did his best, was doing pretty well to keep up. That was kind of the way things were early on. The issue turned up in that Ebby had been used to on Shen, so we saw it versus Sengoku Gaming as well, where he pulled it out. of
Very
getting
effective.
getting lane priority on the Shen. Actually, Shen's a surprisingly powerful duelist, especially early on. If he gets Titanic Hydra early, can do a lot of work versus tanks. Sion outpushes him, whether he has the Hydra or not, I feel, just because of how strong Decimate is. And you just don't chunk through Sion all that well. And that meant that Ebby didn't have the lane control he was expecting to have on Shen. And the Sion was really strong for that one, I felt.
Well, and remember, Initialize, this was again where they decided to do the last round pick on blue side Sion. It was last locked in LeBlanc Sion, and then everybody knew that V3 were going to do that lane swap again, which they did. However, DFM were prepared for it, weren't they, Nymaera?
I don't think they did lane swap in game 1.
That was it was game 4 they did.
Was it game 4?
That's game 5. Game 5 was the last one.
No, game 1 wasn't the lane swap.
No, it wasn't. Game 5 was the lane swap. It was the other side.
It was straight up planes.
Planes. Oh, okay. Well, that's sad.
Yeah. But yeah, no. So they did lock in the sign. So we knew it was a possibility. It's like,
sure.
This is gonna happen. We did,
and they chose to do straight up lanes. And what they got out of doing straight up lanes was they were winning in bot lane, which is really big. So Reiner, first pick Pantheon actually on blue side, which is something which we see a lot in the VCS. Not something we've seen in the LJL at all. We saw like one game out of Corporal from Axes, and then no one else had really played the Pantheon support this split. And they take a really good level 1 trade. They end up blowing the Senna's cleanse really early. They get priority on bot side of the map, and it means that V3 end up getting a lot of early dragons, which is not something which Lilia is great at doing on her own.
No.
I think they also get an early double scuttle too, so the jungle is going really well in favor of. Well, at least Steel has actually managed to keep himself relevant, but yeah, they managed to get themselves a lot of jungle advantages.
It's not the same pressure,
So V3 get themselves a lot of early objectives, even though DFM do pick up some early kills. And then suddenly, just somewhere around the mid game, there's just this monumental team fight where V3 kind of make up for the kills as well.
And it was a really close one, is a lot of what we have to say here. It's not like either team was running away with it. Like, Boogie and Steel were going back and forth. Boogie got the advantage, but Steel was refusing to give him the snowball he was looking for. Reiner blew the cleanse early on Utapon, but that Senna became pretty scary in the mid game once he got a couple kills as well. Once he got a couple kills and some stacks. And it was all looking like it could end up going back and forth. But eventually, just like DFM ran out of ways to kill Sion as well, became a bit of a problem. Senna's not great into him. And obviously, like, Nico has gone towards the Glacial build, which is great. But there was this issue. It was like, okay, Sion's here. You can't get to Lilia. This is problematic.
Yeah, Sennas historically have never been good at taking down tanks. They are very slow at taking barons. They are very slow at taking dragons. It's commonly why you'll see hyper farming carries either from a jungle or mid laner where they can actually burst down these things. It's why you see Syndras that are able to do this because they're effective and all that. But V3 became victorious 1-0 V3. Gentlemen, what were our thoughts after that game? Can you put yourself back there? I'm going to ask you to do this after each game now. So I remember coming out of that game, saying hello to both of you during the break, and we were like, okay, V3 are going to push DFM, if I remember rightly.
Yeah, I think my first thoughts was it kind of reminded me of the first victory that DFM had versus V3 had versus DFM in the regular split a little bit. It's not quite the same because DFM were running a global clump, but it just felt like V3 just kind of outfought DFM when it mattered around the big objectives, and they had themselves the objective lead too, so they ended up snowballing into like a mountain soul for their Sion, which was pretty much unkillable. So it looked like V3 just knew how to end up closing out that game, and they just did it very cleanly.
Yeah, I think my thoughts as well were like a little bit of what Nymaera was saying on that baseline level, but there was just a bit of me in terms of just the fan and also in terms of what I'd been hoping for. Is like, oh, thank goodness, an actual contest. There were certain teams who had really fallen short of the mark. Like Sengoku and CGA kind of fell off a cliff, frankly. And I was glad to say, okay, two teams are pushing. This is actually fairly high level stuff. Are there mistakes being made? Yes, but people are pushing them. So are they making mistakes? People are still making good proactive plays. There is back and forth. There is mechanics on show. So like, okay, this should be a series on our hands, and I'm glad to see that we've got a bit of a contest finally here from our top teams.
Yeah, and I absolutely agree with you. I think that mental boom that Sengoku and CJ had, especially against DFM, is something I'm hinting towards for later. But it's also what is going on with the rest of our teams? What is happening with our region? Is it just something's going on? Has everyone just flipped off of this meta? No, V3 are still really good at least, and they can stand up to DFM. Who wants to take game 2, gentlemen? Who wants to begin us with it? Go for it, sir. Go for it.
I'll do this. So DFM get on blue, which is really nice for them. And they managed to get themselves a significantly better matchup for the Shen. As picks up the Ornn, the Scion, they just ban it away. They don't want to deal with it. And it makes a massive difference. Bot lane, Gang gets back onto Leona. Seros goes back to the Neeko. And we're thinking, okay, this is a bit more comfort for DFM. They banned away the troubling Scion, which they just couldn't kill in the last game. And Gang is fantastic on the Leona, which is great. The other thing we've got to call out here is it was a final red side pick. 5 Lee Sin Boogie. And he didn't really have a lot of good targets to kick in. Who are you really aiming to kick in from this squad of DFM? And they had Shen top, Nidalee jungle, maybe I suppose as an option, but not the easiest to get onto. You've got Neeko, you kick her in and she goes, thank you, free ult. You've got Ezreal. Getting onto him is pretty tough, actually, because he's got so many ways to disengage you as you're coming in. Leona as well, kicking in a tank who can then stun you up. Not fantastic either. So this Lee Sin was going to have to find things early. It was going to be very difficult.
And you only have one AD teammate to buff up with Black Cleaver, and there's so many things to just immediately answer if you do jump in. So yeah, it's just a kind of low value on that pick.
Yeah, that was definitely the question I had, even as a producer. I was watching this and I was like,
Well, we know he's done stupid things on that champion before, but they didn't early pick him a jungler, and he just kind of ran out of tier list stuff which could actually work in the comp they wanted to use.
Yeah. I mean, this is where we saw that. I mean, as Initialize already said, the Lilia ban came through. We suddenly saw DFM, a team adapting to Boogie. They were like, hey, you played this against us and you just beat us it. Steel says, screw that. You're not playing that. Coach listens to him and agrees and goes, yeah, you're not practiced enough against it. Let's just ban it. And this is a point of importance because this is something we're going to touch on later in the series. How the pick and ban phase really evolves between these two teams. Yeah. This game, though, DFM came out with a vengeance, didn't they, gentlemen?
They did. I also want to say that, like, Paz had a bad game on the Ornn. Really bad. Yeah. Like, he was missing Call of the Forge Guard reactivations. He teleported to his death twice. Once in bot lane where things got a bit close, but wasn't realistically going to work out. One time mid lane turret dies after if someone's already gone down. He dies because he's teleported and anyone doesn't get anything for it. So whereas Paz on the Scion looked really good, Paz on the Ornn looked very meh. Very meh.
And like it was a fantastic game out of Steel and Seros particularly, and Ebby's had a better matchup for the Shen, which was fantastic. And it's something you'll note we'll come back to a couple of times is Paz on anything that wasn't the Scion kind of got his ass handed to him in lane by Ebby. It didn't always matter because he turned up in team fights when it mattered for a couple of their wins, but this was one of those ones we went, oh no, Scion's gone. Ebby put him in the dirt. Seros and Steel teaming up as Nidalee and Neeko were controlling a lot of these objectives as well. Getting a bit problematic here. And
what I love about this one, and I'm going to put this in the show notes for our lovely listeners, go over to the Game of Legends website, dear listener. Go to the game page 2 for this because it's such a lovely bar graph that just goes in one direction. DFM got every objective. V3 got nothing. They got they got 3 kills in total, 2 on Boogie with an assist. He had 100% kill participation. Even when he spawned a Lee Sin and his team's doing horribly, he still finds a way to get 100% kill participation and not a negative KDA, which frankly, kind of impressive. But my God, DFM had everything, and this was slightly concerning. However, on the other side of the coin, DFM looked dominant and very much back into their wheelhouse.
I mean, that was the fear, right? Was that the first game was scrappy, it was back and forth. This one, DFM just crushed pretty much every lane. Gang was back on Leona. And it was like, okay, so bot lane from V3 didn't win. Oh dear. Paz looked pretty shocking. Boogie was trying, but it wasn't a great comp for this Lee Sin. Is this a pick and ban thing, or is this a bit more than that? Because this looked significantly more convincing. Is Sion the trick? Was that kind of what we were wondering at that point? And
also Saros and Ace were playing the same lane matchup they did in game 1. It was the LeBlanc and the Nico. And this time, whereas Ace survived game 1 very, very well. In fact, he kind of flourished, right? He actually had a pretty good game. Game 2, he was not looking very comfortable in that matchup either. He was down a lot of CS. He was getting forced off of turrets. He never really became relevant in that game. So yeah, actually, whereas in game 1, Paz looked great and Ace looked good in lane. I mean, I think outside lane, Ace did more than fine. This game, both of them failed pretty badly. And also, given that you're also playing Lee Sin LeBlanc, it's a very strong mid-jungle 2v2. If you can't pull that off, why are you playing the Lee Sin and the LeBlanc together? Because that's kind of their MO. And so
at least roam somewhere.
So DFM played very well. Still a lot of fingers to be pointed at V3.
And V3 had to respond. However, it didn't work out. Before we go on to that, I also want to just put a note here. Gang got Leona. V3, knock knock, hello. Don't give him this champion. Why would you do this? You knew it was bad. You banned it in game 1. But no! Now, this is the point of an interesting point that we did notice between game 1 and game 2. V3's banning seemed to be a little bit suspect on the red side. Blue side, they were far more adaptable, but red side, they weren't as confident. That Renekton, Caitlyn, and Heimerdinger on the red side definitely did cause them some hindrance personally in the pick and ban phase. And in all fairness, that was a pretty poor pick and ban phase, and I am wondering how much of an impact the players, that is actually the coaches, have in the pick and ban phase. Is it all coach driven, or is it partly superstar, champion, or players driven, and then coach assistants?
It depends on the team.
It does hugely.
So teams like G2, they kind of the coach knows basically what they want to aim for, and they know and it depends. So someone like Youngbuck would force people to play champions that he knows are very strong, and he really wants you just to play those champions. So he's got like a lot of things on rails in the draft, so he knows exactly what's going to be played where. Whereas something like G2 or whatever, I would be more like, okay, right, let's just give what you feel comfortable playing with. You give me your champions you're willing to play, and then we'll talk through them, kind of thing. Whereas that's kind of more like a European Western kind of philosophy and stuff like that. Sometimes the coaches over in Eastern regions are a lot more controlling than that. They just kind of, because they want them to be played according to, because obviously they're coaching a philosophy, and the more tightly it adheres to that philosophy, the more clear in the eyes of the coach they can direct the team, right? And that's often quite an important thing.
Actually, that's a really interesting comparison. I just realized the coaches in the West do very similar coaching styles to NBA coaches. Actually, it's very, very similar.
You trust them to know the lane matchup and stuff, right? So it'd be stuff like, so the coach would be like, oh, so how does like AP Cogmore do into this? And be like, oh, okay, yeah, whatever. And it's like, okay, so but what about all the rest of the picks? Can you play into like a Lee Sin jungle as a Cog? And it's like, oh, actually, no, that might be quite difficult. So obviously,
the coach
can ask the right questions, but then you kind of it's just obviously doing that within a pick and ban phase can be quite time constraining and stuff like that.
Well, this is where normally preparation comes in, and this was something that we have already highlighted, but for Sengoku, preparation obviously wasn't quite there, or at least wasn't showcased. Whereas DFM and V3 had prepared, and gentlemen, Initia1ise, you have to take this one as well, honestly, I insist. So, Game 3 DFM, why am I giving it to you? Go on, set it.
Because this was DFM on the red side coming out massively ahead in this game. Utapon's Jhin was phenomenal this game. Gang on the Bard as well did some fantastic, but there was some blind snipes that were raising our eyebrows, which were like really impressive. Snipe. And once again, it was good laning from DFM, but it was honestly, there were a couple fights early on which were getting a little bit close, but it just hit this point where the Jhin was massively doing some insane things. It was Shen into Gangplank, which should be Gangplank favored, and Paz was not looking confident in that matchup. Shen got out to a lot of fights as well. And honestly, the later that game went, it was kind of like, okay, can you find the big Orianna Shockwave? She went for Spellbinder second. She was not going for Death Cap. She wasn't going for anything like that. It was all about the Shockwave. Ace's damage numbers that game were pitiful. I think he managed about 6k in 32 minutes, when you started that game 2-0, that shot, like when you did rush the
6,215 damage.
Yeah, and like that, you cannot go for that. That's not acceptable. And it was really problematic. And then the other side, like Seros, the pop blossoms were really massive. The damage that was coming out of Utapon on the Jhin was really terrifying as well. You didn't really have a front line to deal with the Jhin. Reiner's Pantheon this time out was a lot more mortal. Didn't manage to get the cleanse, and that was problematic as well. And so it was a host of things. And like once again, it was DFM playing well, but there were a few fingers to point at V3 and saying, you picked this Orianna here, really didn't work. Well, didn't work.
And in all credit to V3, they did get first blood and they did get first turret. They actually pulled slowly towards early gold lead. Only 3k. Only 3k. Not worth really noting.
And that's for like 20 minutes too. It's not even a like 15.
Yeah, well, that means a lot more. Yeah.
Exactly. But that's when DFM turned, like Initia1ise has already mentioned, and they honestly outfought the team fighting team of the LJL. V3 had become the team fight team. They were just outright the best. They had they had out team fought CGA, which was a big point because that was the team. If they will go for everything and anything if they can, and V3 outdid that, which just put them on a great place to begin with. DFM didn't give a fuck though, because that Seros' Nico. Why are we just getting to see this now? Why do we go through most of spring without seeing it? Why did we go most of summer without seeing it? DFM clearly
buffs came through, so he got to play it again. Basically,
must have started working in scrims. That's why.
Maybe.
Yeah, no, I think DFM had a really good comp versus V3. It's not like Jhin is whacking on tanks the entire game because there is zero frontline. Gang's Bard, very, very good. It was catching out the likes of Archer in mid lane a lot of times. And also, Ebby just kind of nullified Paz because Paz on the gangplank was behind like 10 CS in early lane. Shouldn't happen on a gangplank. I guess the shining star was Boogie. He ended up having crazy damage number. He had the most damage numbers in the game. He had the highest damage.
Yeah, of course he did, because it's Boogie.
But I think that V3 kind of dropped the ball a little bit on their composition and their draft. I think that you can't really play this comp without any front line, and that's why even though we saw that Reiner had a good game 1 on the Pantheon, even though his KDO was meh, this game was problematic, and it's largely because DFM was so good at making sure they didn't miss position and get caught out by like Pantheon trying to come and find odd angles into the fight.
Well, they actually baited him into odd angles sometimes.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why Reiner ended up being like 0-4 and having 0 hims at the end of the game pretty much.
Yeah.
It's
Sam's
kind of awkward.
Sam's already highlighted the gangplank as well, but it was such an odd pick for the team. It really didn't work.
I just played it a bit in spring, like once or twice, but they look really uncomfortable not playing around a solid front line of that.
And he locked that in to Ebby Shen. He picked it into Red Side Shen.
Well, it's meant to be a lane counter, but
it didn't feel like that at all. It felt like Ebby had the counter pick, if anything, which is wildly abusive.
He was winning the barrel bop game, basically. Like that's always the mini game when you're playing against Gangplank is can you hit those barrels at the right time? And Shen was doing that more often than not, which was just a frustration there.
Also, like Ace had we already talked about his damage numbers being very low, but this was his first ever Orianna game, and
see why?
I mean, like, so I know that they hadn't played any TF this split, but I remember like having, in fact, I think I said it on cast. It's like, hey, I always kind of said Ori and TF might not be Ace's kind of champion because they're kind of laning based champions.
Yeah, this was something I brought up on a previous podcast episode as well.
Yeah, and so like we know Ace is good in skirmishes and team fights. That's where he excels, getting around the map and applying himself to the map. It's not about staying in lane and actually getting farm numbers into good trades. He doesn't do that in lane really. He gets a bit out muscled by some of the other laners. And the Ori, he had an okay early game. He got like 1 or 2 good shockwaves, but then like most of the game he was not impactful.
Well, gentlemen, though, let me take you on to game 4, and I'm gonna take the reins for this one because honestly.
Yeah.
Where you set me up, Nymaera, is too perfect. Ace on his Orianna looked problematic, honestly. It was a degradation to the team. It wasn't going to be how they find it. Game 4, Game 3 also, maybe I was going away asking maybe there might be some mental game problems. Is there imposter
I thought
syndrome?
it might be a 3-1.
We wondered.
Oh,
We wondered.
We all I think it all crossed our minds going, not like this, not like this. We want silver scrapes. We want this to go further. Are they having some fear, imposter syndrome, and everything else? And this is actually something I actually brought up on our Discord when people were talking about the Sengoku DFM game. I gave a chapter, a brief excerpt of a book from The Mental Game of Poker, one of my favorite books to talk about the mental game of any games, because no one talks about mental games, and I love it because I tilt like no one. So I like to know why I tilt. V3 fixed any mental game problems, if there were any mental game problems. They had destroyed that. Ace was allowed to play Zoe, something that he hadn't been allowed to play for the rest of the series. So I'm actually going to quickly go up because I believed it wasn't banned in all of the games. No, it wasn't.
No, it wasn't banned in games 1 through 3. No.
It was just
But
not something.
he just didn't want to play it into the Nikkei was the problem.
Or his coach wasn't allowing him to. Either or. Again, we don't know. We don't have that information. However, he was allowed to play it. And mid-diff, lads. Mid-diff. Ace played maybe his best game, and I'm going to hint a little bit towards Game 5, but Game 4 was Ace's maybe come-out game of 2020. And I know before saying that before Worlds is a bit, but this might have been his best game ever for V3.
It was getting close. I mean,
some of his Syndra games were pretty good in spring.
True.
True. Like I think there's also that Zoe game in Super Week as well, where he did
yes,
really great. We had a couple great games
versus Rascal Jesters.
And like the thing with this game is like actually the early game was we were kind of saying like at about 20 minutes we're saying I think DFM have this one. They're up 4K. All the towers are going down. They're stacking these dragons. They've got no front line, but with this kind of gold lead, they should be fine. And then Ace and Archer hold their ground in one of these massive team fights around after a dragon goes down in favor of DFM. I think that's about the 20-minute mark, if I recall correctly.
No, that's V3. V3 steal it, remember? They steal it at the end.
Do they steal it?
They do. I'm looking at the game right. I'm talking about Game 4 here. Right?
Yeah, I'm talking about Game 4. No, this is true as well.
V3 gets second dragon.
Game 5 is the craziest steal.
Yeah, so this is the one way that you see the gold graph. So this is actually around
20 minutes. They also get second and third Drake.
So DFM get their second Drake here.
They get first Drake. They got
Ocean Drake way earlier in this game.
DFM's second Drake. Oh, sure. Sorry, at the 25-minute max. My apologies.
So there's this Drake. They get this Drake, and then they're basically about to go in, and they're looking for a fight. So they got this Drake. We think we can go in for this. Take a magical journey in, and Archer on this Ash finally dies, but it takes so long for him to die. The rest of V3 then get to pile in. Ebby's just not there. Doesn't have Narbar. He finally turns up, but at that point his team has died. And this is the big turning point. DFM drop from nearly 4,000 gold ahead to 1,000 gold ahead in one team fight, and it completely turns the game around from there.
I think Nymaera's got the same slight asterisk he wants to add as me.
No, so a big thing about Archer is that he played Ash before in this series, and he played it with the blade, the blade build, and he'd kind of been a bit meh. It's kind of meh, whatever. This game, V3 let through Caitlyn, by the way. DFM are on blue side, and they are playing Caitlyn, and they just say, well, screw it, we're going to play the Ashe lane into it can survive. And actually, they do pretty well in the laning phase. Archer goes to the Essence Reaver build. He says, I am the carry now. I'm going to do relevant teamfight damage. I'm not going to sit on this Bork power spike. And it really turns up in a couple of these team fights, particularly towards the late game, but it really starts off earlier. And as Sam was saying, it takes really long to kill him. But during that time, he's also doing very good damage.
And leading up to that point that Sam has hinted towards, off that second Drake, V3 did also secure maybe the biggest objective that kind of got them into the opportunity to even win that. And that was 10 seconds earlier, they had gotten themselves Baron buff. And that Baron buff meant that DAFM decided to try and go for a trade, but it was a very late trade of Dragon for Baron. It didn't work out for DFM because they get the Dragon. They pay with their lives, as Sam has already said. And Ebby wasn't there. He wasn't there. Well, he was there, but he wasn't there because he didn't go Mega Gnar. And that's part of his kit. And Go for it, Sam. Go for it.
Like, so this is another one of those ones where we had some questions about DFM strategy. We said coming into this game, it's like, they've got strong lanes, like Gnar into Renekton's kind of nice for Gnar. You can bully that out if you get the right chances. Caitlyn Bard is just very strong. Azir is always a bit of a wash, but whatever. And like, you then start asking, it's like, okay, so you're not necessarily going for the early objectives, you're going for the goal.
Yep.
Fine, you're using your lane pressure, whatever. But there does hit this point where like you do have to get X amount of gold ahead, or you're going to run into issues because they had not the best ways to engage and no real front line. And Archer hits his 2 item spike. Ace hits enough of his item spikes that they then start being able to fight front to back in DFM, lose a couple, and then can never fight front to back again. And then you've got Zoe plus Lilia as a combo for the first time in the series.
It was so good.
And some of the multi-man sleeps, or bubbles into sleeps. It was just so much non-committal CC. So much non-committal engage where V3 could keep throwing things, keep seeing if they could catch something. Until eventually it does. Like, throw a swirl seed. Doesn't hit? Fine. Throw a bubble. Doesn't hit? Fine. And eventually when something does land, DFM just don't have the way to force the fight because they're waiting on Mega Gnar. And V3 says, okay, we'll back away until it's done.
Yeah,
and then we'll go back to bowling.
You know, and particularly in terms of like fishing for stuff, the person who was like bit the hook if they were fishing the most was Saros. He ended up eating like a lot of bubbles. That's credit to Ace, definitely.
Really
kind of some problems with the positioning of Saros in the
But he was landing blind bubbles at points.
Yeah, he was. Yeah, he was. There was particularly one just before. I'm trying to remember if it was V3's first dragon or maybe their second.
It was the
something like that. But Ace ends up like landing like 2 or 3 bubbles. So the first one he ends up getting out of 2 seconds. Well, it's the first one he like disengages. Second one he gets poked. Third one he just dies. And then like so Ace had some really good accuracy on his bubbles.
This was a game that went 38 minutes. It was a slightly longer game than the rest of the games they have been of this series, but this was the game to whet our palates for Game 5, gentlemen. Game 4, a notable point is Syros, but the champion he was playing, this Azir, disappointing performance from Syros on this Azir. We have seen things from him, but Caitlyn's a big important one. And the Azir, personally, were the 2 big takeaways for this game 4. Showing cracks for DFM. This definitely showed some cracks in DFM's armor, which, honestly, after the first two victories for them in this series, kind of looked pretty impenetrable.
Yeah, hell, after the first 20 minutes of that game, it was still looking pretty good.
It was looking pretty difficult,
4K gold lead at 20.
Yeah, they had 4K, and then
90 minutes, even better.
Then they had a Drake stolen and dropped 3K in one team fight.
Yeah, they only gave away
first.
Yeah, they gave away first blood, but they got first turret, which almost every single time, which would you say to a team? Would you rather first blood or first turret? I think I'm always saying first turret. I just always, because of what it means for your map awareness and what you open up throughout the rest of the game. Unless you're able to snowball that first blood, obviously.
I think it's like, if you get like first blood and turret plates and like force to lose a load of waves, it changes around. But I think in isolation, I kind of get where you're coming from.
Yes, but gentlemen, time for us to go on for a little bit about this, because we could keep going on for a lot longer about Game 4, but we really need to move on, honestly, and let's get on to Game 5, our penultimate one, and apparently
the ultimate one.
I can't actually. It is the ultimate one. This was a 30-minute game, though, gentlemen. Not many kills across the board, but combined between 2 teams, there were 15 kills, and let's try and go through this game as methodically as these teams did, because let's build it up. Now, people probably already know the results, but let's really set it. Pick and ban phase goes through, gentlemen. Notable bans that come through from V3. Heimerdinger has been a consistent ban from V3, excluding, I believe, one game, or did they ban it? No, they banned it through every single game, actually. But then for DFM, they did that exact same thing with the Aces Galio. Apparently, even in scrims now, it's well to say, Aces Galio is very good, and
the team utilizes it very well. As to this, same with the set ban too. They've like triple flexed it. It's just still very, very important to their team.
And that's a highlight, right? I don't know any other team in the LJL that can triple flex it and has shown consistency to that.
To that extent,
to that level of excellence across.
Yeah, Nico was banned for Syros, which is also important because that's a champion we've been seeing through the Sengoku series, being banned, and now V3 are like, well, we're on blue side now because we won our game 4 on red side, so we had 2 blue side wins, 2 red side wins. Side selection doesn't matter anymore in the LJL. We're all just so good and so even. It comes down to macro decisions and everything else. That's what I want people to take away from this. And they decide to ban Ebby's Renekton, which, frankly, after game 4, V3 getting Renekton, I can kind of see that. They don't want to.
It has actually been first pick material in LPL, VCS.
Everywhere.
It just means it. Yeah, I mean, like, don't get me wrong. I think there's a lot of stuff which can really fuck with Renekton. But if you're against a team which likes to play very railroaded competitions, like we definitely play this kind of comp, Renekton can be very, very strong at making sure your early game and therefore like your jungler's pathing is very varied and strong.
Yeah. Also, like a lot of the counter picks into Renekton are often like require something out of your top lane or require you to play very top side focus, like things like Quinn, like
Quinn J solution,
like where like you don't have a tank, you need to get this guy ahead. If this doesn't work out, you don't get the snowball, you're in a lot of trouble, and you're always vulnerable to ganks. So like,
so Chovy's pretty good against Renekton players.
Yeah, potentially is. That's very true. But like that's the other thing. Is like, you can first pick Renekton because you're saying, yeah, well, if you do pick this stuff into Renekton, potentially A, we can flex it mid if we're really crazy, but B, is like you are going to go for a particular kind of composition and it can be quite risky to pull off. Indeed.
So now let's quickly run through the rosters as that's the notable bans that really came through. Granted, those second round bans were still important, but let's just quickly go through this. Paz back on his Sion, Ebby playing his Shen. This is something we've already seen this matchup before, actually already in this series from game 1, remember, gentlemen. So we're getting a rematch. The Lilia's out. DFM decided not to ban it because they wanted to prioritize other champions. Oh, and obviously, because they didn't ban it, they decided, well, we won't even pick it in the first round. If you care that much, we'll wait for the second rounds. Lilia does come back up, is their last pick as a statement to DFM, and Steel responds with his Nidalee, but much earlier on in the draft.
I'll say though, for me, the most important thing is the first pick for V3.
Yeah, their first pick. Go on, Nymaera. Announce it.
Yeah, so they didn't. So you'll notice that we talked about V3's bans and stuff, and we talked about how Gang has been ridiculously good on Leona, and he won in game 2 on it, and he looked really good on it. V3 first pick Leona. They first pick it. They did just say, okay, right, so we didn't have a position to pick this. Caitlyn's been banned anyway. That's not something we want to, we wouldn't first pick that anyway, I guess.
And Reiner hadn't played Leona once in playoffs. This was their first game.
No, he had played one. He lost. It's
not,
the one game
not in playoffs. Not in playoffs. Not in playoffs. Not in playoffs. No, I'm literally looking at the stats here, Samuel. No, it was in summer season he did it.
Was it not versus the one game that V3 lost versus Sengoku Gaming?
Yeah, he's. Oh no, Sam, that was NT. That one that was playing that.
I was NT who was playing it. I'm so dumb.
Actually,
it was the other side of the matchup. I apologize.
Yeah, it's fine. And also, Gang hadn't played it for all of summer as well. I'm now actually just looking at the overall stats. He's only played Leona 3 times, and that was in 2 of the other times was in spring, and he had lost both those games. So this is a statement to Gang, going, I've only ever lost on this champion in season 10. I'm gonna beat you with this champion now. And honestly, Alex, I think that's a really good highlight, to be fair.
Because I know that we picked up on it, and obviously the teams had seen that as well. I mean, it was telling for me that V3 in game 1 blue side said, hey, we're banning this. I think in game 2 and stuff, when they didn't ban it, I was wondering whether they were saying, do we have to ban it? They lost against it, and then they thought, okay, this is still high priority.
Yeah.
So maybe game 2, there's a question mark on that. But coming into game 5, they kind of like, having like that's very ballsy. There's some confidence behind that.
It's also confidence that DFM aren't going to try and ban it against them or something. They're just probably the coaches might be going, the players might go, we get Leona, lads, Leona. Go on, Sam.
And I have to say, it wasn't like even like Reiner's performance on the champion was that crazy. It was good, don't get me wrong. But he died 3 times quite early on.
It was the game. What it needed to be, though.
But exactly, and it was a takeaway from Gang, and importantly as well as DFM's response was Gang's Rakan, which is legendary. This guy's pulled it out at Worlds. He smashed in spring on it. But it's a risky pick into Leona at the best
of last
times.
pick, and it's a self-counter pick. You don't win lane on that. Because
Yeah.
the Zenith blade is so
not versus
important
Leona,
And let's be real, the biggest one for me, well, the biggest two picks, honestly, it's crazy I'm saying this, but honestly, Ace getting the Zoe after what he had done game 4 was surprising, as we do know Dead Nation Focus Me have aggressively banned Zoes before. So we're getting that again. But the one I loved, and I remember just screaming in the document to you both, going, Archer got his Aphelios again, and this was his best champion for Season 10, full stop. I'm sorry.
The thing, there's a whole load of reasons why this is kind of awkward, though. Well, lots of stuff, right? Because remember that, so in the first round, we saw, like, I think we saw, like, from the first 3 picks from DFM, I believe they were Jin, Azir, Nidalee.
So yeah, went Nidalee, Jin, and then Azir was the last one. Yeah, B3.
Yeah, so you know that they already have like a lot of champions which are relatively high range, and then that's why DFM and their bans in 4 and 5 go for Kalista and Ashe. Yep. They don't go for the Aphelios because they know that those two are maybe ones which can close the distance and make things a bit more awkward for them. So then when the Aphelios gets locked in, you're like, okay, V3. I mean, we called it, it's like, oh, maybe they go for Ezreal or something. And they go for the Aphelios and think, okay,
we're bringing old school V3 back.
But then think of the narratives behind this. Spring split, playoffs. That thing we were talking about earlier, when Archer kind of bottles it in playoffs. He doesn't play as well as we expected him to do so. Archer and Rhino were really good in regular split.
Aphelios.
Yeah, and then like they draft him Aphelios, which is huge carry potential. Don't get me wrong, but into a draft which is very hard to navigate. Azir, he lands like a Q onto you, and you struggle to run into a team fight. Nidalee Spears can chunk you out for half your HP.
You get hit by anything. Yeah, you get hit by anything. Jin says no.
Yeah, exactly. And then they like draft in like the Shen and the Rakan combo too. Like Aphelios is a very hard champion to pilot during this game. The amount of faith V3 have in this guy that did kind of bottle it in spring, even though he's had so much pressure put, he had such high standards and stuff. That's a hell of a lot of trust to put in him.
And go for it.
In fairness, they really helped get him to the point where he wasn't going to be at risk.
We'll talk about that.
We haven't quite got into the game yet, so I'm sorry.
Another little pick that V3 managed to get at the end of it all was, of course, the Scion, which managed to make its way through. And lo and behold, remember how that game 1 went when Scion into Shen? Like, oh, hang on. Shen doesn't really win that one as well as you think. Doesn't get to get the shove as well as you think. It could be a bit problematic. Oh, hang on. Wasn't there that thing about them being able to do that lane swap thing, lads, with the Scion?
Yeah, that was that thing. We didn't talk about it for game 4 because it didn't actually happen in game 4.
Didn't happen in game 1. Didn't happen in game 4.
But it happened against Sengoku, and it happened again. Yeah. Go on, Nymaera, our analyst and color caster. This is prime technology. Go on.
So game 1, they were set up to have the same lane swap comp that they had against Sengoku. Effectively, you have the Lilia power farming, which means that she can get to the point where she's cleared out, got a lot of XP for an eventual dive onto the weak side of the map. You have an Aphelios who scales really, really well. Can suffer in lane, doesn't have necessarily the easiest kit to pull off in lane in a lot of 2v2s now. Scales really, really well. You can take the teleport on him. You can take Cull on him. You take someone who can dive very, very easily. I think Leona's one of those champions, by the way. You have Scion, who can wave clear better than any other champion in that side lane. And you're also doing this versus a Jin, who you don't really care if you get solo farm. V3 pull the lane swap. They pull it against the Shen. And
game
fairness,
5,
DFM, game 5, and it's just so ballsy because what it means is you put all of your carry potential onto Archer at this point. He is the basket which all the eggs have been put into, and yeah, I mean if he flashes in and like fucks up in one team fight, maybe DFM just run away with the game. Lo and behold, that didn't necessarily happen. I think that DFM responded relatively well in the first couple of levels. Yeah. Gang recalls as the Rakan, and he goes to actually duo lane top lane with the Shen to make sure he isn't dived.
The reaction speed that Gang has, how quick he responds, is almost faster than you can realize to press the recall button and start running. He immediately was just like, I'm making a call. Yeah. Honestly.
Yeah.
Because what it starts with is Lilia going in for an invade onto Raptor, so at that point you know that they're doing something fucky and you can see who's invaded with them. Gang recalls manages to make it top lane in time to save Shen's level 1 from being dived level 1, so we can get to level 2, and suddenly diving a top lane Shen with like CC and all this stuff becomes very,
and
very
a Rakan there.
Yeah. However, it does mean that Aphelios is still getting uncontested farm with an early Cull, still having teleport and all this other stuff. And Jin doesn't take towers very quickly. Scion's happy farming. Shen's been put down. It's not like Aphelios has been really denied anything. So V3 still get a huge amount off this play.
And it's also like one of the really big things here is that Because Aphelios starts with the cull, gets the same plates as Jin, but Jin recalls early for a cull himself to try and match. He's still behind on popping that cull, and by the time he's popped cull, Archer's managed to eventually get the first turret. It's eventually responded, but like it takes time. He's then basically down an item because he's still waiting on his cull to pop, and that hits around some of those early fights that do go in the favor of V3 eventually, that really do become problematic. The fact that, yes, Jin matches well enough, but he's just that step behind really hurts Jin in the long run.
Yeah, and this was just, honestly, partly the Archer show, partly the V3 show. Mm-hmm. As we run on, they do get first blood, do V3. However, they it looks a little bit weird, because while they're in a good place, the gold difference is virtually neutral. If anything, it's even, and DFM get the first 3 objectives. They get the Infernal Drake, they get Rift Herald, and they get the I always forget it's Cloud Drake. I always think, I look at the emblem and I'm like, it's air, and I'm like, no moron, it's not air, it's something else, it's fluffy.
Well, this is the problem where you shift your AD carry to top lane. It means that you don't have him available to fight on the bottom side of the map, which is maybe where they didn't do it in game 1, when remember they ended up winning through just getting all the objectives and winning through that and having the Scion. But no, they obviously believe that Aphelios is worth getting funneled and getting all this gold onto, and lo and behold, he did kick the crap out of some people in some team fights.
Yeah, he did. And like, I've also got to call it out here as well. This was Ebby's worst game on the Shen all playoffs. He'd been really good on this champion. The Shen this game was actually quite poor, got caught out doing some really dumb stuff a lot. That was quite problematic. The Stand Uniteds weren't able to be proactive either with the Rakan engages, which was also problematic. And then there was this one point where like DFM were like triaging pretty well. They weren't getting completely run over. They got some objectives. Like, okay, well, you got the Herald. You managed to get a couple early Drakes. Maybe if you can keep the Drake stacking, you can still fight this if you get this right. And then Seros is pushing top lane. He's got Steel around to kind of shield him. And Lilia throws a massively long-range swirl seed that hits a minion. And the splash hits Seros. He gets Lilting Lullaby. He gets killed.
Yeah, he stood too close to the wave.
And it was like, and that one moment, I believe, gets them a Baron pretty early on. And it's just, at that point, it's all starting to go wrong. If not Baron, it gets them a lot more out of it.
So, I mean, zooming a little bit into this game after that, the V3 do become courageous, and they get a few kills on the scoreboard, and they also get the first tower, gentlemen. This is an important point, because this is something that really starts to open up the rest of the map. And that was at the 30-minute mark. Once we hit 30 minutes, it rarely goes down more than a few hundred gold from V3. They start to pack everything, and boy, do they get going. They get the Rift Herald at 17 minutes. When basically the second it spawns, they start attacking it. And then
I think they ended up putting it mid to like when Dragon spawned.
They did. They just aggressively threw the Rift Herald down.
Oh yeah, because they took 2 turrets off it and had a charge into the third. That was crazy. Oh.
Yeah.
Sorry, did I steal your point?
No, go for it. Gosh, this is what we're meant to be doing.
No. V3 were just, they were heads up in a way that Sengoku just weren't versus DFM. And as soon as like DFM like were on the dragon and all this other stuff, it's like, well, why do we give a damn? We've got Herald and whatever. So DFM were on the dragon and like, wait, this isn't a 1 turret trade. Okay, let's back off. And they don't get the dragon. They end up losing mid lane outer, inner, and then a charge onto the inhibitor, and then they back off, don't get the dragon anyway.
They also lose Ebby.
Yeah. Yeah, and then they just couldn't defend anything. And no, V3 just very heads up with what they could take with the time they had, and they're just very ruthless about it.
Well, they could have taken the base inhibitor turret if they hadn't responded, which is just insane, because they were like, we're going to push our wave and we're going to get the Rift Herald to do it, and they're just like, are they not going to respond? DFM?
Yeah, and I think this is also the first game, and it's in the critical game as well, where V3 probably uncontested won every lane. Like,
I'd agree with you on that.
Because even in the 2 losses, the other 2 wins they had, like, it was scrappy. DFM were fighting back. the game 4, DFM were up 4,000 gold before they kind of lost it in the team fights later on. This was the game where Archer got really far ahead. Utapon couldn't match because of where the coal pop was at. Ebby was put behind. Seros was doing okay, but so was Ace. And like, then they were still getting the early kills, still getting the early towers. Stop the Drake snowballing. Like, this was a clean game from V3 where DFM didn't look like they were contesting all that well, honestly.
Yeah, and that was an important point. That loss of losing those 2 towers and the inner tower, the base tower, I guess, basically signed DFM into base protection mode as opposed to anything else, which meant V3 just strategically and very calculated from all members were going around, and you'd see Paz sometimes just in bot lane, AFK farming, pushing in, and then you'd see 4 members all just go top lane just to get rid of another top lane turret. And then they're like, wait, we need to respond to Paz, but Paz is a Scion. None of us can actually do anything. Ebby, just stand at turret and do something. We need to respond to 4. Oh god, they got the tower. And V3 dismantled so much. However, it wasn't flawless until the Baron. Who wants to take the Baron, gentlemen?
You can do it, Sam. You gushed about it a bit earlier.
Yeah, so
go on.
This
I just watched the clip for the Baron, actually. It's a great team fight.
It is fantastic. And, it starts effectively with Seros saying, okay, we're going to trade this Mountain Drake top tower, and that's what's going to go on. I'll try and do this. And he gets caught by the swells. He goes down. It's a 5-4. And then what happens is the Baron is started, and DFM come try and contest, like, can we get in? Can we do anything here? Steel's trying to get around and do something. But all the while this is going on, Ebby comes in, and Lilia has this insane positioning at the back of the Baron.
So good!
Where she's blooming blows both the Baron and over the wall is catching Ebby's Shen. And and he just can't stand there. And eventually DFM have no health bars, have to run away. Shen falls. They get Baron on 5. They got the Mountain Drake earlier. Everything goes their way. It's
also involved like Boogie tanking the Baron until he was like 200 HP. The curtain call opens up. Archer gets hit by everything. And then also Ace has to stolen Spelthi's flash over the wall to tank Baron to finish it while all this is going on the Zoe. It is an absolute shit show.
Ladies and gentlemen, I've put the clip in the show notes if you're interested. It's a 30-second clip. It covers just after Ebby has died, and the last 20 seconds, 30 seconds, where V3 have to secure it. Go for it.
Yeah, and they secure the Baron, but then the question is, can they get out? And if
How low are they, Sam? How low are they?
I'm not even joking. They are sub 50 HP on 3 to 4 members. Boogie, Ace, Reiner, Archer are all inches away from dead, and Utapon hits pretty much every damn bullet. It's on his curtain call. It's just not quite enough. And if he had half an item more even, he would have absolutely run over the back end of V3, and maybe that would have been the game turnaround, but they didn't get it. V3's wallets were too big. They had the man advantage, and they get the ballsy Baron call. They get out with every member. They got the Mountain Drake, and there was just no hope for DFM from that point. That was their last.
That was the last hurrah. Yeah, absolutely. And this was a point at 25 minutes, gentlemen. The Baron was taken down. Now, as we already know, V3 had to run back. They had to recall. They needed to heal up and also buy, because they just made some gold there as well. So they've got to go back. There's no sense of thinking about anything else. The members of V3 siege detonation focused me, and they want it. At this point, the scoreboard is 8-3, but that's not the final scoreboard now, is it, gentlemen?
No, it goes to 12-3, and is just V3 just smashing the base. And so it's running at the base, realizing that I think with the numbers advantages after they take after that last fight, they just kind of keep using the desync timers to catch out people under turret. Ebby falls trying to defend the turret, and at that point, it doesn't matter that respawns are coming in. It's the numbers advantage. You have hilariously strong carries when if you have to dive into an Aphelios on his terms, things do not go well for you, and that's kind of what happens at the end of this game too. And they end up finishing the game off this last push. So yeah, I mean, V3, they take the series.
And I also got a comment on that last fight. Seros had Nash's death cap, which is great, but there was nothing like a Leandri's. And Paz had a Negatron cloak and a Spectre's cowl in his inventory, and he's like, Jin's not going to kill. Yeah, and Jin's not going to be able to kill the Scion. He's no good at killing up tanks, and like Saros is like just doesn't touch the Scion either. And it's like, what do you even do? He runs at you. Reiner comes in as well. Archer just gets this, onslaught with Severum forwards, and you're like, well, I guess this game is over.
Yeah, and this just shows, one, the power of Paz's Scion.
Going to be a bit. I think we're going to be seeing some more Scion at Worlds, guys.
Oh, well, I mean, if people don't start playing it, Paz is just going to take the free real estate, go 4-0 in the round robin, and just be like, "Cool, guys, really good. First place. I mean, you guys are free."
The rest of his picks looked a lot more suspect, I have to point out, but the Scion was fine.
Yeah, and I mean, to be honest, it's only really the Ornn, because they only had one loss. Well, they only had one loss where it wasn't anything else that you're kind of graciously going, "Oh, that's a really bad game." It was only the Ornn.
Ornn's kind of a meh pick in a lot of competitions anyway. I'm not too.
Yeah, he's nowhere near what he used to be in spring.
I really wanted to see? I really want to see his Maokai at some point, because he played that pretty well in spring.
I mean, also we know he can play Camille and everything else. So
I mean, he was a serviceable Renekton. I mean, he went down in lane.
He was serviceable, yeah.
Expected. I'm just not sure it's expected to the point of first turret plus 50 CS, which is more my issue there.
But to end this game, let's talk about the KDA that the members of E3 had, because it was glorious to see that this is how they get to go to Worlds for that final game. Paz, 0-0-9 on a lane swapped Scion. He picks this champion on the idea you are going to kill him, and then promptly doesn't die and farms effectively in a lane swap. Boogie goes 4-0-5, 206 CS, more than Paz. This man is honestly a monster, and if you're not scared of him and you're an international coach listening to this podcast, get scared of him. Your junglers need to be terrified. Yeah, he solo might have won V3 their spot in the finals.
And if you would like our opinions on this team, as anyone as a spectator or anyone involved in broadcast or anything, absolutely hit us up. We've got we can direct you to the right clips, the right games, even if you don't want to watch our broadcast of it and just want to get pointed to the right VODs. We do have that info. It's in our noggins.
It's fair. I just think of the Calippo trilogy, Hot Fuzz. Sorry, and he's reloading the gun. He's reloading the gun and just going, shame. That's it. That's what I feel like with Boogie. Ace is Zoe. He wasn't allowed to play it, probably due to coaches or whatever. My God, why did you take so long to pick it? Because it was gorgeous.
We had some issues. We had a lot of issues in spring with his Zoe, right?
We had back in spring. That was spring.
Yeah, back in spring. And that's the thing, right? For me, I'm like, yeah, these guys looking pretty good on some picks that maybe we didn't trust him on before.
Reiner went, well, you didn't trust him. I was like, he might be good. And now he wins. And I'm like, I got vindication somehow.
This is another narrative thing that I remember. Remember back in that same playoffs they lost to DFM in spring, that 3-1 loss. One of those losses was them pulling out the Trundle Zerath against the Zoe, and the Zoe lost Flash at level 2, and then was down huge amounts of CS and just couldn't do anything. It felt like DFM thought that they had a way to deal with the Zoe, and they disrespect it. Remember that they tried to counterpick it in that game, and it worked really well. They just kind of picked the Azir into the Zoe this time, and it just didn't work for them. DFM disrespected it, and Ace had a really good last couple of games.
Yeah, Reiner. Sorry. I want to just go for it.
The real standout for the Zoe was that game 4 where the bubble. Was so good in the late game. It was less impactful in the game 5, but even then it was a Mountain Rift, a Mountain Rift plus bubble.
Still had the most damage in the game, Sam.
Still had the most damage.
29% damage share.
Right, exactly.
I mean, and
the only reason I'm saying is like the focus on this game was Archer in the early game and when
for sure.
But late game, those bubbles start popping up over walls, the Mountain Drake, you've lost vision. Zoe gets to kind of run wild and do her thing.
Yeah, gentlemen. So let's go on to Reiner, who won 3 and 8. He was the only person to die on the team, and to be honest, we've already talked about his performance. It was exactly what it needed to do. He got into the thick of things. He stunned the necessary targets. He was important. And if he died, that meant nobody else on their team died in every single fight. And that was critical because DFM tunnel visioned on the wrong targets in this game.
He was the first person into the fight, which was huge. He was the one taking up the damage. It was also worth saying that actually he was tanky enough that Paz felt comfortable going for Zeke's Convergence as his third item, second item, which meant that he could be the one that was buffing up Archer at the start of fights. And that ended up just being quite big, you know, because it meant that Leona could go stone play. It didn't have to go towards the Zeke. It became really tanky. Yeah, it did die 3 times. But do you know how many cooldowns they had to put into him first? Like, he was the only person to die because they had to spend all of their cooldowns killing him and they had nothing left for anyone else.
It wasn't surprising if Gang or Ebby's ults were normally popped when Reiner popped his ult. 2 for 1 ults traded, and that's a Shen ult and a Rakan ult.
Yeah, like again, it wasn't all that exciting from Reiner in the early game, but hit that mid and late game, he was just so tanky, and he was just doing a great job in terms of getting the backline. Was it as crazy as Gang's Leona? No, but whose is right now, and it was more than good enough, and it was just such a smart draft pick to say, we'll take this away. What if you got an answer to this pick that you've been so high on?
It's also a statement to international teams going, hey guys, I can also play this versus the guy that's playing it maybe the best in our region. Yeah, and I beat him with it. And he counted himself because he thought he was that good. Nice. But let's talk about the man who really carried this team. Boogie has the reverse KDA, just switch the assists and the kills around. But Boogie didn't hard carry this game when it comes to damage. Archer did. And we had set the stage up all that time ago that they put all their eggs in one basket, and well, Archer went 5-0-4, and he well and truly deserves that trust from his team. This team trusts each other, and that's the biggest point that we can really emphasize from this. No one? Anyone? No?
Yeah, no, I think that's just true, and I think it's also like,
you actually had it quite succinctly though.
Yeah, like I mean, like if you want some more, I think it'd be nice to show the comparison between spring and summer. Like actually, this guy didn't stumble when it mattered largely. I will say, you know, there was game 3 where it looked a bit rough, but actually, honestly, he stepped up more often than not and was very, very consistent, and particularly in those mid to late game team fights, stood his ground so well. Managed to stay alive, kept the flashes and stuff very well, was smart in the lane swaps. Just, great performance from this guy.
Gentlemen, we've praised Archer. We've praised V3. Congratulations must be said on the podcast to V3 Esports for winning the LJL Summer Split Finals and will be representing the LJL at the World's Play-In stage, gentlemen. Well done. Well done to V3, honestly.
Yay. V3. Woo.
V3! This does mean now that we will have to tally up all of our decisions and choices and predictions so we can find out who the best analyst was. And we will be, I'll be doing that at some point, or one of us 3 will do that at some point.
Well, we'll get on it.
Figure it out at some point. We need to start doing what PCS do and have that lovely little bar graph where they have all the analysts and their things. I need to copy Opal on that. That's actually a rather nice thing.
VCS do something pretty similar as well.
They do, I think, yeah.
God damn it, everyone's doing it.
We need to start doing it. Yeah, but this is our first year doing it. These guys have been doing it for a few years, and we're already coming in with the hot boys. We're the new fresh boys on the scene, lads. Gentlemen, for our V3 Detonation Focus Me series, there's lots of players that we could easily be putting up for our player of the series. I'm going to go first with this one.
Go for it, sir.
My player of this series was Boogie. It's Boogie. I had to. Nymaera. You were our middleman for the first one. You'll be our middleman for this one as well. Who was your player of this series?
I know full well what I've written here. I'm actually going to change the script because even though Boogie's right, I am giving it to Archer.
Is he allowed to change it if he's already written it in? Isn't there?
I haven't revealed it yet.
I mean, I know what it is.
Yeah, I'm giving it to Archer.
Okay, he's giving it to Archer. We'll allow it. Initia1ise, who is your player of this series?
Mine is Boogie.
Okay. Now, as tradition dictates, Nymaera, you must defend your point of picking Archer as your player of the series.
The best player of this series was Boogie.
Not a good start, sir. Not a good start. I'll be honest with you.
That's not great.
However, this guy is a fucking rookie. This guy is in his first year of competitive play. He was up against the 5-time international representatives of the LJL.
Second longest signed player to a team, remember?
Yeah.
Tied
The only
with
chip played
Zero.
as longer as Faker.
Yes.
On the side of DFM's veterancy, anyway. This is the guy that couldn't quite cut it in spring. This is the guy that stumbled versus DFM in spring. He had all the trust put into him, and in game 4 and game 5, he stood up and he was fucking counted for.
He was.
Don't get me wrong, in terms of raw play, all of everything that, if you're going to just put it on a very numerical value and stuff like that, it has to be Boogie. In fact, that's what I had written down. But just on the narrative standpoint of it, I want to commemorate it somehow. I kind of wanted to go last just to see if Sam had done Boogie, just so I thought, you know what, I don't want to give like Archie the overall one, but I want to have at least a shout out there. Because, gosh, just this guy had his anime story and it was so great to watch.
And that Aphelios at the end perfectly summed it up, as it was his best champion in spring that stumbled and struggled in their series. I can appreciate it, and that's why I most heartily allowed it. I was like, is he allowed to do that? Yeah, we'll allow it. Oh, it's all right. But, Initialize. So, as Nymaera already said, the raw play, abilities, and everything else, Boogie was the best player. He almost always had a neutral to positive KDA, even in losses. We already covered that in their game where he played Lee Sin versus Sengoku. And it went horribly, but even then, he went 2-2-1. Why did we pick Boogie as the player of the series for the finals?
It really is the consistency for me, a lot of this, that actually, even when his team was losing, and honestly, like, essentially losing lanes and stuff pretty hard, and like even in the hard fought victories, he was pulling out some absolutely insane numbers. Game 3 loss, for example, he had the most damage in the game on Lilia.
It was.
And then also, for me, the clutch moment which broke the game for V3 in that final game was that swirl seed onto Zeros into the top lane was so huge. And, you know, Steel had largely been matching him step for step, trying to go back and forth. But when it came down to the wire, it was consistency and then clutch on top of consistency that did get them the win. They get the Azir, they get the Dragon, they get the Baron, they get 5 men out. He gets Shen over the back of the wall with some really clever positioning. Like, all of these things which go, it's a very impressive all-round package of you play well in loss, you play well in wins, you play consistency, and you can make plays like that.
Yes, he could. I need to correct myself. He played the Lee Sin game 2 versus DFM. My apologies. I thought it was in the loss to Sengoku, but I think that was that wasn't that one. But to emphasize it, he also pulled out Lilia most of playoffs and was just showing he's like, I can play the newest champion in this game basically a week or two from when I'm allowed to play. Well, no, the first time I'm allowed to play her. And I'm just going to school all of you. This man's champion pool, he began with Jungle Echo. Remember, way back in spring, his game 1 versus DFM was Jungle Echo, and it looked strong. It was like, okay, this guy's kind of playing unorthodox.
Actually, game 1 was Jungle Diana. Game 2 was Jungle Echo.
Oh, my apologies. Thank you. Thank you for correcting me. I'd much rather be corrected by you than some random person in the comment section, so I'll take it that way. Or an angry @ tweet, but then I'd actually appreciate the @ tweet, so I'd be like, am I famous now?
Be angry with him anyway. You know,
be angry with me. Give me a notification, so I won't look at you. But he plays Lilia. His champion pool is so wide, and he is one of the best players in the world.
He really is.
He is, and he only has he has the second lowest KDA internationally on his team, and he is still top 10. Do you want to know who's above him now? It's Ace. He is one spot above him, 0.01. Ace is 7th or 8th, and Boogie is just below him on that. But that's insane. That's how far this team has come. Reiner's still in the top, is in like the top 20. And this team is just phenomenal. KDA is a horrible statistic, by the way, to actually base players on. But it's like, it's phenomenal that these teams and this player and Boogie's just fucking good.
I'll give you a stat that does tend to matter. His DPM was the highest on his team. He had a higher average DPM than Archer did. He had 100 more DPM than Ace did.
I think it's really important that he's playing Lilia when a lot of international junglers haven't really shown this level of proficiency on it. Put it this way, I think if there's one player from like wildcard regions who might be able to make it into a world's top 20 list, it might be Boogie. Don't put it.
We need
look,
to do far more
he-
research,
look,
probably.
He won't, because there are 4 LPL teams, some incredibly EU teams, and LCK teams too. He won't, because there are some ridiculous players. But if there was one player from Wildcard region, I'd be like, yeah, maybe he deserves to be there. It's probably Boogie, actually. This guy's had a ridiculous
Up
year.
there.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, he is. It's good for the. It's not good. It's phenomenal. It's fantastic that this is a player who has had such high play skill and level to be able to rally his team around him. And maybe this was part of the coaching and everything else. We don't know. But this is a team that has really rallied around him. They have adapted and changed how they play. Ace has now become a utility player whose Galio is so good. DFM 5-time ban it. This is a team who has players in individual champions and individual roles. If they get it, even the best team in the region who has had 5 wins in a row for titles goes, nah, we're not doing that. The set as well. This is a team that forces the best teams in a region to go, we don't want to do that. What does that mean for international, where these teams go look through it and go, well, they got set apparently that's really good. Now we'll let that through. Yeah. And then V3 will go, cool, we'll take it. You can't, they are a world wide, they are now a season champion. They have now done it. They're in the history books. History will remember them for beating DFM in the finals. And it's perfect. Now, gentlemen, I want to hand it over to you for any closing thoughts, as this podcast went on a little bit longer towards the end because of V3 DFM, as to be a little bit expected. We ran through the first part in less than an hour. I was like, bang, but we gushed a little bit, but fuck it, we can.
We might. Yeah.
But yeah, any closing thoughts, gentlemen?
Yeah, I mean, I think that playoffs was like I said on the broadcast, it kind of felt like we were bereft of a really good playoff series in the lower bracket one between DFM CJ and then DFM versus so DFM CJ and then also DFM and Sengoku too. It felt like those kind of didn't match up to the par that we set for them. Then the finals just absolutely blew it out the water. Like I said, we've been absolutely blessed by some of the storylines and narratives that have come out of this season. It has been a pleasure to follow these teams. I hope that if you have followed our content, that you've enjoyed it too, because it feels like it's been worthwhile.
Yeah, I think that's a really good shout, and I think it was a fabulous series to send V3 off to Worlds with. It was the contest I think they deserved in some ways. It wasn't
100%.
like given to them to free. It was made for a fabulous viewing experience for those of us back home as well. We got to see 2 of the best of the LJL, and if you are going to win the LJL, you want to do it against DFM. You want to take down the guys who are kind of those guys at the top of Olympus, or I suppose Mount Fuji if we're talking Japan here. You kind of want to prove you can scale that mountain. You've taken them down. It's not like it almost feels a little bit hollow, or there's always going to be those questions saying, but did you take down DFM to get where you were? Yeah, they did. And it was close, and it was hard, and there were some mistakes, but there was also some brilliant play. And they take them down, and they can go on to Worlds with our blessing, and our hopes will go with them as well. I think they were coming in with some pretty decent ways to at least make the other wildcard teams, the other play-ins teams, a little bit nervous here.
We'll talk about that in another episode.
Oh yeah. And with that all said, it's been truly phenomenal covering this region for the last year. We had our options of many regions, and I'm very glad that we picked this. We probably would have been blessed with many storylines and everything in most regions, but honestly, it feels like home, the LJL. It feels like home. It's I know the players now, and I know the players and their little habits that they have. We've made memes over the last 9-10 months that we've been covering. Upper men things immediately springs to mind. Eddie with his fumble of high fives.
Church of Aria.
Church of Aria. Boogie is a disciple, but also a prophet himself.
Yep.
Just the Archer phenomenal run from rookie coming in on his first spring split. Makes it all the way to round 3.
The roulette wheel of Rascal Jesters. Picking a random champion.
God, Rascal Justice Spring was just Mad Scientist, Axis's Cinderella run to actually make playoffs in spring. Honestly, we've been so blessed with this region, and thank you for anyone that has been along with us. Thank you to the VCS crew and everyone over there, because you know who you are if you're listening. We thank you. everyone else that has helped us out with casting or producing or just giving us random tips or feedback in general. It's been really phenomenal. Content's not stopping here, though. I will stress that now. We are still not quite sure what we're doing, but there will be something. If at minimum it's merely a podcast here or there. We might do more, we might do less. Who truly knows? But with that said, thank you so much for watching and or listening. But we'll see you all very, very soon.